Her name was Clarice, and at the moment this story starts, she was being walked to the place where they meant to burn her. She did not fight the two guards holding her arms. She did not weep or beg or twist toward the crowd to find a face that might still care. She walked. The chains between her wrists were heavier than she expected, and she found herself thinking about the weight of them, the way a person thinks about whether they remembered to close a window. Mild, distant, already half somewhere else. Ahead of her stood a cross built from thick logs, and around its base, they had stacked more wood, dark with tar, so it would catch fast. She looked at it the way you look at a thing that belongs to you. In a sense, it did. They had built it for her. The guards lifted her onto the platform and pressed her spine to the logs. Iron chains went around her wrists, her waist, her ankles, and a man she had never met cinched each one until it bit. She let them. There was nothing in her arms strong enough to make any of it matter, and she had stopped pretending otherwise a long time ago. When the chains were set, she lifted her head and looked at the crowd, and the crowd looked back. About 200 of them had come. They filled the square in a loose half ring, close enough to see her face, far enough to stay clean. Farmers in from the fields, tradesmen with their aprons still on, children up on shoulders. A few of them were eating. Most of them were talking, to each other, not to her, in the easy, idle way of people who had walked out to watch something and were a little bored waiting for it to begin. That was the part she would remember if she got to keep remembering anything. Not the cross, not the chains, the boredom. 200 people had come out on a cold morning to watch an 18-year-old girl burn alive, and to most of them, it was about as much as a market day. A girl that age, chained to a stake, was supposed to be screaming. Clarice knew that. She knew it the way she knew her own name. The screaming was the show. It was what they had walked out here to see. She decided, without much heat, that they were not going to get it. The heat began before the flame did. She felt it climb the logs at her ankles first, a dry, living warmth, and then the smell of pitch turned sharp, and the first thread of smoke crawled up past her knees. Somewhere below, a man with a torch had done his small, ugly job and stepped back. The fire took the lower wood with a sound like cloth tearing, fast and greedy, and the cold morning went orange at the edges. Clarice watched it come. She tipped her head a little, the way you tilt toward a fireplace on a winter night, and noticed that the heat reached her face and stopped being something she could measure. The crowd's noise dropped, not to silence, to that low collective hum a crowd makes when the thing they came for finally starts. Heads turned up. The children went still on their shoulders, and the condemned girl chained to the cross, with the flames already past her waist, looked out over all of them with a calm so complete it might almost have been mistaken for boredom of her own. Then, quietly, almost to herself, she said the only thing she had to say to any of it. "My name is Clarice," she told the fire, "and I would like it on the record that I am being extremely reasonable about this." Here is the thing the crowd could not see, because it was happening on the inside. While the fire climbed, something in Clarice came loose. It was not pain. It was a memory, but not one of hers, not one that belonged to an 18-year-old count's daughter who had spent her whole short life inside these borders. It was older than that. It was the memory of a different person entirely, a man, middle-aged, ordinary, tired in the way men get when nothing has gone wrong, and nothing has gone right either. He had lived in a world with no magic in it at all, a flat, lit, modern world of glass and engines and small daily complaints, a world where no one burned anyone, and where a girl tied to a cross of logs was a thing that happened in old paintings. Not on a Tuesday. That man had lived a whole quiet life, and then it had ended, the way lives do, and somehow, what was left of him had washed up here, behind the eyes of a frail blonde girl in a kingdom of swords and monsters and noble bloodlines. She had carried him asleep inside her for 18 years without knowing it. The fire was what woke him, and the moment he woke, everything Clarice had taken as simply the shape of the world, the magic, the counts, the talent tests, the casual cruelty of a crowd at an execution, tilted, and she saw it all at once from the outside, the way a grown man sees a story he is too old to be frightened of. That was the secret behind the calm. The girl on the cross was not brave. She was not numb. She was two people looking at the same fire, and the older of them had already decided, with the flat patience of someone who has run out of things to be afraid of, that none of this was going to go the way the people in the square expected. Well, she thought, anyway. The flames reached her chest, and she waited to begin dying. To understand why 200 strangers thought a sweet-faced girl deserved this, you have to go back 10 years, to a smaller room and a different kind of waiting. Clarice had been a beloved child once. The narrator can report this plainly, because it mattered to no one later. She was bright and gentle, and easy to dote on, and for the first 8 years of her life, the Gloria house doted. She was a count's daughter in a kingdom that prized its noble blood, and blood like hers was supposed to carry a gift. That gift was measured exactly once, with a crystal. In this world, when a noble child turned 8, they were brought to a testing hall and made to lay both hands on a clear stone, and the stone answered. It shone. Color and light bled up through it according to the size of the talent sleeping in the child. Gold for the great ones, deep hues for the strong, at least a flicker for the ordinary. Every child got something. The strength of the glow was the strength of their whole future, because in a land where a single powerful mage could turn a battle, talent was not a hobby. It was worth. It was the entire measure of what a person was permitted to become. They stood little Clarice in front of the crystal, and her family watched, and she put her small hands flat against the cold stone the way she had been told. Nothing happened. No gold, no color. Not even the dim ember they gave to the weakest commoner. The crystal stayed clear and dead under her palms, and the room stayed clear and dead with it. And a word she did not yet understand began, very quietly, to attach itself to her name. Talentless. She did not understand that day that she had just been sentenced. She only understood that the warmth in the room had gone out, and that her father would not look at her, and that something she had done, or failed to do, by simply being born wrong, had cost her a thing she could never earn back. The doting did not end all at once. That would have been cleaner. Instead, it cooled, slowly, into politeness. A talentless daughter was an embarrassment a count's house could not afford to show and could not quite throw away, so they did the practical thing with her that practical houses do. They found a use. Her father arranged an engagement to the neighboring count's son, a serious young noble named Eckhart, to tie the two territories together and keep the Gloria bloodline of some value on paper. Clarice was the value. She understood that much even then. She was not loved after the crystal. She was managed. At 14, every noble child in the kingdom was sent to the Royal Academy, and so Clarice went too, the talentless girl among the gifted. And there she learned what raw talent actually bought a person. It bought everything. There was a pair of twins at the school, the Gillette twins, prodigies both. The kind of talent the crystal answers in gold, and the twins hurt people. They turned their magic on other students and left them broken more than once, and the academy did nothing, because the academy ran on exactly one rule, and that rule was, the gifted are not punished. A child who could win a war was worth more than the children he maimed. Clarice watched that lesson land over and over, and filed it away, and said nothing, because a girl with no talent had no standing to say anything at all. Then, during one of the long breaks, Eckhart met Mazetta. Mazetta had no family name. She was a commoner, a village girl who had healed people with her bare hands before anyone taught her how, and healing, it turned out, was among the rarest gifts a person could be born with, harder and stranger than the magic that breaks things. The Miller house found her the way a jeweler finds a stone in the dirt. And Eckhart, who was supposed to marry the talentless Gloria daughter to satisfy a contract, looked at the gifted commoner who could mend a dying man with a touch, and made the choice his world had trained him to make. The narrator will not give Eckhart a speech here. He does not deserve one, and he did not really make one. There were words, surely, reasoned, regretful, dressed up as something other than what they were, but they all reduced to the same plain sentence. He had found something worth more than her, so she was no longer worth keeping. That alone would only have ended an engagement. What followed ended a life. To break the contract cleanly, the Miller house needed Clarice gone, not merely set aside. So they reached for the one charge a noble cannot survive. They declared that she was not truly of Gloria blood at all, a false blood, a fraud sitting in a noble seat she had no right to, and in the kingdom of Lois, that was not a scandal. It was a crime against the crown, and the price for it was the stake. It was a lie, and everyone with any power knew it was a lie. It did not matter. The lie was useful, and Mazetta was valuable, and Clarice was not. And in that arithmetic, the truth never once came up. But the lie still needed her own family to sign it. And here is the wound the fire was only ever a frame around. When the Miller house declared her false blood, the Gloria family had a choice. They could have stood up. A father could have crossed two territories and a crowd, and stood between his daughter and a cross of logs, and said the one true thing, that she was his, whatever a crystal had shown when she was 8. Any of them could have, not one did. They agreed instead. They let the engagement dissolve, accepted the charge against their own child without a word of protest, and handed her over. Because if the kingdom said she was not Gloria blood, then the safe thing, the practical thing, was to agree that she was not their family. They were a house that knew how to read arithmetic too. A talentless daughter was a liability. A dead one was a settled account. They held her for 3 days while the judges did their work, and then they sent her here, and now she was burning. And Clarice, chained inside the fire, looked out at the crowd one more time and did the math the rest of them had already done. The Miller house was here, She could see them at the front, where the important people stood, watching the thing they had built do its work. The Gloria house was not. Not one of them had come. Not her father, not a brother, not a cousin sent to stand quietly at the back. There was an empty space in the square exactly the size of the people who were supposed to love her, and through the smoke, she counted it and understood it completely. They had not even come to watch. She was not worth the mourning. That was the whole of it then. Not the fiancé who traded her for a better gift, not the house that needed her dead to seal a marriage, not even the 200 bored strangers chewing while she cooked. The center of it was the empty space, and the simple, total fact it spelled out, that in her whole short life, she had never once been worth defending to anyone. She waited to feel something about that. Rage, she expected. The older mind inside her, the tired man who had seen this world from the outside, knew exactly how much fury a person was owed for an ending this unjust, and reached for it, and found nothing. She frowned inside the fire. I should have been much angrier than this, she thought, and turned the thought over, and could not make it true. And while she was busy being puzzled by her own calm, she missed for a moment the stranger thing. The flames had her now, full and roaring, wrapped all the way to her shoulders, the kind of fire that does its work in seconds. Long seconds passed, more than long enough. She was not burning. The fire poured over her skin and her dress and her bound hands and did not take. There was heat and light and smoke, but the consuming, the thing the whole morning had been built to do, simply did not happen. Her flesh stayed flesh. The pain that should have arrived, the pain 200 people had walked out to hear her give voice to, never came at all. She lifted her head and looked down at her own hands inside the flames, turning them over with the mild, faintly insulted interest of a woman checking a stain that would not wash out, and thought with great seriousness, that is not supposed to work that way. Out in the square, the hum of the crowd changed. It started small, the way these things do. A man near the front stopped chewing. A woman pointed and said something to the person beside her, and that person went quiet, and the quiet spread outward through the half-ring of strangers like a shadow crossing a field. They had come to watch a girl burn. They were watching a girl stand in the middle of a roaring fire, whole, calm, looking faintly annoyed, and not burn. The murmur rose into something with an edge to it. 200 people who had been bored a minute ago leaned in, all at once, with a new question on every face. And the question was the same one Clarice was turning over behind her own steady eyes. If the fire would not take her, then what exactly were they all looking at? She did not have the answer yet, but standing there, unburned, in the wreckage of everything that was supposed to be the end of her, the talentless girl the whole world had thrown away, felt the older mind inside her settle into something quiet and certain and not at all afraid. The world had decided what she was worth. The world, she thought, had been working from very bad information, and the fire kept burning, and Clarice kept not dying, and 200 witnesses began, one by one, to understand that they had come to the wrong execution. The chains went slack first. Clarice felt the iron loosen at her wrists, and it took her a moment to understand why. The logs were burning down. The cross that had held her up was eating itself from the bottom, and the bonds that had bitten so hard an hour ago now had nothing left to grip. She worked one hand free, then the other. The waist chain slid off the charred wood and fell. It was, she thought, the least dramatic escape anyone had ever made from a stake. She stepped down out of the ash. The pyre collapsed behind her in a soft rush of sparks, and she stood there in the open with cinders settling on her shoulders, alive, whole, and entirely unsure what to do about it. Her prison dress hung off her in scorched rags. A guard's cloak lay crumpled near the platform's edge where someone had dropped it and run. She picked it up and pulled it around herself because the alternative was standing in front of 200 people half-dressed, and even a woman who had just declined to burn had her limits. The crowd had gone quiet in a way crowds did not usually go quiet. Then she walked toward them. That was when the screaming started, not from her, from them. A soldier near the platform shouted something high and broken, a man demanding to know what she was, and Clarice honestly could not have told him. When he screamed it again, right in her face, she only shrugged. "How should I know?" she said. He did not like that answer. 3 more soldiers closed in front of her, spears down, boxing her against the smoking wreck of the pyre. One of them was shaking so hard the spearhead rattled. She looked at the ring of steel pointed at a girl who weighed less than their armor, and something in the situation struck her as almost funny. There was a branch near her foot, still burning at one end. She picked it up and threw it at the nearest man. He yelped and batted it aside, more startled than hurt, and she made a small note that throwing things was not going to be her gift in this life. Another soldier solved the problem his own way. He drew his sword, leveled it at her throat, and told her not to move. She moved. She walked forward into the blade on purpose. There was a part of her that wanted to know, the same part that had thrown the burning branch, the patient experimenter behind the calm face who had just survived a fire and wanted a second data point. So she stepped into the point the way a person tests a stare they are not sure will hold. The steel met her, resisted for half a breath, and then slid home. The whole length of it went through her, the guard stopping cold against her ribs, the bright tip standing out clean from her back. She felt it the way you feel a door close in another room, a fact, distant, happening to someone else. No heat, no tearing, no buckling of the knees the body was supposed to do on its own. She looked down at the sword passing through the middle of her as if it were a sash someone had tied there, and the only thing she felt was a small, cold interest. So that was settled too then. The fire had not been a fluke. She did not stagger. She did not fall. She did not die. For a long second, the soldier just stared at what he had done, at the girl standing calmly on the length of his own sword, looking back at him with mild curiosity. His arm was still locked straight, still committed to the killing blow, and the killing blow had simply refused to happen. Then he made a sound no grown man should make and let go of the hilt as if it had turned red hot. The blade came free as she stepped back off it, and there was no blood worth the name, and there was no wound, only torn cloth where steel had been a moment before, and beneath the tear, unbroken skin. The sword rang on the stone. She was still standing. The whole front row of the crowd took a step back at once, like a single animal flinching. Somewhere among them, a woman started to weep, the thin, frightened sound of a person watching a law of the world break in front of her. Clarice straightened the cloak at her shoulder. Behind her, the fire was finishing its meal of the logs, and ahead of her, the people who had come to watch her die were opening a path through themselves without anyone telling them to. She had been the smallest, weakest thing in this square an hour ago. She was beginning to understand that none of that mattered anymore. She started walking into the gap they had made. The crowd parted the whole way, and Clarice walked the length of it slowly, and somewhere in those steps, the older mind inside her did what it always did. It counted. It was very good at counting. In another life, it had been an ordinary man in his 40s who balanced accounts and remembered grudges with the same tidy patience. And now it laid the last few years out in front of her like figures on a page, plainly without heat. There had been a boy she was promised to. The Miller house had taken her in as a match for their son, not because anyone wanted her, but because a bloodline needed continuing, and she had been tolerable enough for that. Then the son had found a gifted commoner girl, a natural healer with a soft face and no family name, and decided he wanted her instead. That alone would have been only a humiliation. People survived broken engagements. The Mullers had wanted more than to be free of her. They had wanted her gone in a way that left no claim behind. So the charge had not been a broken engagement. The charge had been false blood, that she had faked her noble lineage, lied her way into a count's house, and false blood was not a scandal. It was a capital crime. The word had been said in the right rooms, the papers had been signed, and the thing had moved with the smoothness of a plan that had been waiting for an excuse, and her own family had signed too. That was the figure the counting kept circling back to. Not the fiancé, not the molars, not the kingdom that lit the fire. Her father's house. The Glorias had put their name to the lie that condemned their daughter, and then they had not come. Clarice looked as she walked at the place where they should have been. There was a stretch of the square near the front, the good viewing ground, where a count's family would stand to watch a matter of their own blood be settled. It was empty. Not grieving, not protesting, not hiding their faces, simply absent. A gap in the crowd shaped exactly like the people who were supposed to have loved her and had decided it was easier not to attend. The older mind finished its sum and set down its pen. Every name that should have stood between her and the fire had instead helped carry her to it, or had stayed home. The ledger was complete. She had read it twice now and felt both times the same nothing where the grief should have been. She kept walking. At the far end of the square, raised above the rest on the steps of the great house that had ordered all of this, the Miller family was waiting, and they had finally noticed her coming. They stood together on the steps, the head of the house, his wife, the eldest son, and Eckhart, the boy who was to have married her. 4 of the 5 faces she had expected. The healer girl, the one she had been thrown over for, was not among them. Clarice noted the absence and let it go. She had no quarrel with the girl. She had never had one. Count Miller had a quarrel with her, though. He was a man who had spent his life certain that the world moved when he told it to, and he was watching that certainty come apart in front of 200 witnesses. She could see him saying something to the men beside him, low, fast, the words of a man who has just realized the floor is not where he left it. She did not need to hear them. The narrator of her own situation could read the shape of panic work well enough. What he decided, in his panic, was force. It was the only language his house had ever spoken. He called for the archers. They were good. She would give them that. The bowstring sang, and the arrow took her square in the chest, and the impact spun her half around and put her down on the stone in a sprawl of cloak and ash. A gasp went through the square. For one breath, everyone there, the Count included, believed the world had returned to its senses, that whatever she was, an arrow through the heart was still an arrow through the heart. Then she sat up. She got her feet under her without hurry. She brushed the grit off her sleeve and pushed her hair back out of her face, the small tidying motions of a woman who has tripped on a step. She looked down at the shaft standing out of her chest with the expression of someone who has found a thread on her dress. Then she closed her hand around it and drew it out, smooth and slow, and when it came free, her palm was red. And then, between one moment and the next, it was not. The wound was already gone. There was nothing there to have been a wound. She let the arrow fall. Nobody moved. The archers did not reload. The soldiers who had boxed her in at the pyre did not follow. 200 people and a house full of nobles stood and watched a small ash-streaked girl cross the last of the open ground, and not one of them could make themselves stop her. There was something around her now that did not have a name, a weight in the air that pressed the hands of brave men flat against their sides. Clarice reached the bottom of the miller's steps and looked up at the man who had built her death, and the Count looked down at her, and there was nowhere left for either of them to go. For a while, she did not say anything. She was, in fairness, still working it out herself. She said at last, mostly to the air. I think I understand now. She studied her own hand as she said it, turning it over, the hand that should have had a hole in it. The square was so quiet she did not need to raise her voice. Every soul in it had leaned in without meaning to, waiting to hear what the dead girl had to say. I feel like I should be angrier than this, she went on, and there was no anger in it to prove the point. Only that flat, almost gentle curiosity, a woman reading her own pulse and finding it steady. Honestly, I'm not that furious. You'd think I would be. They burned me. My own house signed the paper, and I keep waiting for the part where I'm supposed to scream, and it just isn't coming. She lifted her eyes to the Count. But, she said, let me add one more but to it. I have decided. I have accepted it. What I am now, this. I had no choice but to accept it. So you do the same. That was all. She did not draw a blade because she had none. She did not lift a hand. She did not climb the steps. She told the man who had engineered her killing that he would have to accept what stood in front of him, the same way she had. And then she simply waited for him to do it. He could not. Up on the steps, Count Miller had stopped speaking. The orders had dried up. He stared down at the girl, and the girl stared back, and whatever he saw in that quiet, upturned face went into him like cold water into a cracked stone. His mouth worked. One hand came up toward his chest, not in any grand way, just a man reaching for a place that had begun to hurt. He took a half step back into his own son, and then his legs were not under him anymore. He went down on the steps of his own house, not flung, not struck, folded, the way a coat slips off a chair, all at once and without a sound. His knees gave first, then his shoulder found the stone, and the rest of him followed it down with a soft heaviness that had no fight left in it. By the time he came to rest against the pale step, he was already gone. There was no blood. There was no mark on him anywhere. The man who had said the word that lit the fire had been undone by nothing he could see and nothing anyone could fight, only by the plain, quiet proof, standing at the bottom of his own stairs, that the word had not worked. His heart had refused to carry the weight of what it was looking at, and it had stopped. His wife reached him first, or tried to. She got one hand on his shoulder and shook it, and said his name once, and then she looked up at the small ash-streaked girl standing below the steps and could not say anything else at all. The eldest son did not move toward the body. He moved away from it, one step, then another, his back finding the stone of the house, as if distance from his father might be distance from whatever had reached out and touched him. The square did not erupt. That was the strangest part. There was no cry, no rush, no surge of guards drawing steel. A bell somewhere in the city kept ringing on its hour, ordinary and absurd, while 200 people stood and watched a Count drop dead at the feet of the girl he had burned. The silence over them did not break. It thickened, breath by breath, because every soul in that square had just understood the same thing at the same moment, and it was the kind of thing that takes the noise out of a person. Being powerful had not saved him. Being noble had not saved him. Being right by every law and custom of this kingdom, with the paper signed and the fire lit, and 200 witnesses to swear it was lawful, had not saved him. And if it had not saved a Count on the steps of his own house, it would save none of them. Beside the body, Eckhart could not make his mind hold the shape of what it had seen. The girl he had been promised to had been a frail, talentless thing he had set aside without much thought. a problem solved by a signature and a fire. He had stood on these steps a moment ago as the son of the most powerful house in the city. Now his father was a heap of cloth on the stone, and the talentless girl was looking up at him with mild, patient eyes, and not one word would come. Only a single thought going around and around with no bottom to it. Impossible, impossible, this is impossible, while every certainty he had ever owned quietly walked out of him. Clarice looked at the fallen count for a moment longer. Then she looked away, as if a small chore had been seen to. She turned and walked away. There was no decision to it, no last word thrown over her shoulder. The man who had built her death was dealt with, and there was nothing in this square she wanted to take with her. She left the way she had come. Back down the open lane, the crowd was still holding open, and behind her, the Miller house stood frozen on its own steps and let her go. Eckhart did not move. He stood 3 steps from his father's body and could not close the distance. Later, he would not be able to explain it to anyone, least of all himself, that his legs would not carry him to the dead man until the girl was wholly gone, out of the square, out of sight, as though some part of him understood that to step toward his father while she could still see it was to invite the same quiet folding down for himself. So he waited. He let his father lie there in front of everyone, and he waited. And the crowd watched him do it, and they understood that too. She left the betrayer alive. She had thought about it for exactly as long as it took to look at him, and decided he was not worth the trouble of ending. Killing him would have made him something, a man she had hated enough to kill. Leaving him standing useless beside his father's corpse made him nothing, and nothing was closer to the truth. He could go on living in the wreck of his house. That would do more than her hand ever could. And as she walked out, the thing that would do the rest was already being born in the crowd behind her. It started as it always starts. One person leaning to another, a word passed low and fast, then carried sideways and back. The girl had not burned. The sword had not held her. The arrow had fallen out of her and left clean skin. The count had dropped dead without a mark on him the instant she spoke. Each teller added a little. By the 3rd mouth, she had walked through the fire untouched. By the 5th, she had pointed at the count, and he had simply died. By the 10th, she had cursed the whole house with a single look. None of them could agree on her face, but all of them agreed on the important part. By the time Clarice reached the far edge of the square, the witnesses were no longer describing a girl. They were describing a witch who could not die. The girl the Muellers had called talentless and false-blooded. The girl the Glorias had handed over without a word, now standing over a dead count while a whole noble house stood too afraid to touch her. It was a very good story. It was the kind that does not stay in one square. It was going to walk home into the Miller house and the Gloria house, ahead of any official word, into the markets and the servants' halls and the rooms where deals were made. And it was going to rot both names from the inside long before she ever came back for them. Clarice did not look back to hear it. She pulled the borrowed cloak closer against the smell of smoke still clinging to her and kept walking, out past the last of the staring faces, toward the city gate and whatever lay past it. She had no plan. She had no family, no house, no place that would take her, and a body that the world had just proven it could not get rid of no matter how hard it tried. By any reasonable accounting, she had nothing at all. But the old mind that liked to count had finished its sums for the day, and it had landed somewhere strange and steady. The world had looked at her and decided what she was worth, and then it had done everything in its power to be rid of her, and it had failed at every single step. If there was no place in this world for a thing like her, then the world was simply mistaken about how much say it had in the matter. She would make her own place, one they could not throw her out of. She walked through the gate, and behind her, a count lay dead on his own steps, and a sun could not reach him, and 200 people began, one by one, to be afraid. The riders came out of the dusk and made a ring around her on the empty highway. Clarice stopped walking and let them. 2 days behind her, a count lay dead on his own steps, and a town had begun, mouth to mouth, to be afraid. She had walked out of it with nothing but the cloak off the fire and a set of plain travel clothes she had bought from a shuttered shop, because the talentless dead daughter of the Gloria house owned exactly that and nothing more. She had been wondering where the road went. Now there were 6 horses telling her. Their leader asked if she was the Lady Clarice. She said she had been called worse things that week. They were the Marquis' men, they told her, servants of a noble named Leopold, who had stood in the crowd at her burning and watched her decline to die, and had sent them out the next morning to bring her in if she would come. There was a carriage. There was shelter, if she wanted it. For a moment, she thought about the other direction. The road went somewhere too, probably, and no one on it knew her name. But a man who collected an unkillable girl off a highway was a man who wanted something, and Clarice had spent 18 years being given nothing and then set on fire for it. She was, by now, very curious about people who wanted things. "I see," she said, and brushed the road dust off her sleeve. "I'll accept the invitation." She climbed into the carriage. It rode 10 days east. The Marquis was a thin man with a narrow, angular face and eyes too large for it, and he dressed plainly and sharply, like a knife that had decided clothes were a waste of its time. He did not stand when she came in. He told her what the arrangement was, and he was honest about it, which she respected more than she expected to. He would guarantee her food and a roof, and no questions about the dead count behind her. In exchange, he had two people he wanted dealt with, a brother and sister called the Gillette twins, prodigies of the academy, the most gifted mages anyone had produced in a generation, and the most dangerous, and lately too dangerous, even for the man who owned them. He called her the talentless Clarice while he said it. He did not say it to wound her. He said it the way a man reads a label off a crate, and Clarice let the brand sit on her like it always had, because a thing people underestimate gets to keep its measurements to itself. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said the strange part. He said the world was tilting toward an age when magic itself would stop answering to anyone, when the gift would grow past the men who held it. He said it lightly, the way you mention weather you don't like. Clarice filed it where she put everything in this world, under things to come back to. She said she would meet the twins. They were beautiful, was the first thing, and they spoke almost in unison, was the second. Trent was tall and lean, and Laura was soft and doll pretty, and both of them looked at her the way a child looks at a toy that might, if handled correctly, come apart in an interesting way. The servant who delivered her called her the experimental subject they had asked for and left quickly. The twins took her out to the ruined yard behind the house and asked her, politely, to go stand over there. Trent raised a hand and her right arm was simply gone, taken at the shoulder in a wash of fire. There and then, not there. Before the pain finished arriving, the arm grew back. The twins went very still. Then Laura began to laugh, delighted, and said it was incredible, that it was unforgivable to have hidden a talent like this. And Trent loosed a thing with no shape that opened Clarice clean through the middle, and she closed again as fast as he could open her. Here is what the twins never noticed, across all of it. They thought they were running the experiment. They were not. From the first regrown arm, Clarice had been the one taking notes on how the fire was shaped in the air before it ever left his hand, on the half-second tells in his fingers before the cutting thing arrived, on the words they let drop to each other when they forgot a guinea pig could listen. They killed her to learn what she was. She let them to learn what they knew, and what they knew was magic, the real machinery of it, the part the academy charged a fortune to merely hint at, that it needed two things to live, a fuel and a hand to shape the fuel, and that almost everyone in this world spent their whole lives mistaking the size of the fuel for the skill of the hand. They spilled it across 100 days for free, because they could not imagine the toy was awake and writing it all down. She used the 100 days for the other thing too. Every death taught her the rules of her own body, where it began to knit and where it knit last, how fast, what it cost her, whether she could feel the edges of the process from the inside and lean on them and slow them or hurry them along. It came slowly, the way a baby learns to stand, then to walk, then to run without thinking about it. The first dozen deaths she only endured. By the 50th, she was watching herself come back the way a surgeon watches a hand he is learning to trust. By the end, she could feel the machine of herself the way the twins felt their fire, every seam of it hers to govern. They had wanted a subject who could not die. They had built without noticing the one person alive who finally understood exactly how she couldn't. Laura coveted her by then, openly, the way you covet a jewel you have not figured out how to steal. Clarice let her. It was, she had decided, still too early. The twins vanished sometimes, to where they never said, and on one of those absences, the Marquis came to the mansion himself and poured the wine with his own hand, which told Clarice the conversation mattered to him. He said the twins had become useless to him. He said it plainly. They had grown past the point where they could be aimed, and a weapon you cannot aim is only a danger to the man holding it, and he was weighing whether to be rid of them. He asked what she thought. What he told her next, he had only hinted at in his cold castle. The age of nobles was ending, he said. Magic was inflating, every generation reaching further, the gift swelling past the men born to it, and soon there would be powers loose in the world that no army and no bloodline could stand against, that could take a whole city in an afternoon. When that day came, he said, The size of a man's power would stop mattering, only whether it could be controlled. The twins, for all their menace, were chasing the very root of that, the essence of the thing. And to a man planning for the end of the world, that was a price worth paying. Clarice listened and felt the floor of her stomach go cold, because she had heard this before, not in this world. In the other one, the one only she remembered, where ordinary men in a duller age had built weapons that could erase whole cities in a heartbeat, and then spent the rest of their lives standing very still around them, terrified of the thing they'd made, holding it with both hands, never able to use it, never able to put it down. She had grown up in the shadow of that exact arithmetic. She knew where the road the Marquise was describing came out, because her old world had already arrived there and was still, even now, holding its breath. The Marquise thought he was confiding in a tool. He had no idea he was describing her old world to the only person alive who had lived in it. "And what do you want me to do about it?" she said. It did not come out as a question. 3 months after she arrived, a messenger came at a gallop. Demons had crossed into Escard territory, and the twins were ordered to the front. Clarice said she was coming too. They asked her why, in their light, unbothered way, and she gave them the truth flattened down until it sounded like nothing. "I want to see a demon," she said. When they pressed her, she looked at the 2 people who had killed her every single day for the better part of a season for their own amusement, and said they had no right in the world to question why she wanted just that. They thought that was funny. They let her come. The overseer rode with them, a careful, watchful man named Garrett, a former scout the Marquise kept on the twins like a leash that knew it could not hold them. He had been watching Clarice for 3 months, and it had been ruining his sleep. A girl burned at a stake should want something, revenge or answers, or to go home. This one asked after nothing, not her family, not the men who lit the fire, not her own name. She studied the people killing her and said thank you with her eyes, and that was all. Garrett did not have a word for it. He only knew it frightened him. The battle was a slaughter before the twins reached it. The human line lost more than 30 men bringing down 3 demons, scattered into little knots of 10 or 20 soldiers, so no single mage would ever be worth a demon's full attention. Sacrificial arithmetic, bodies spent like coin. Then Trent and Laura walked onto the field and turned the whole thing in the space of a breath, and afterward, they complained that it had been boring, a waste of an afternoon, that they would rather be home with their toy. "No," Clarice said, when the field had gone quiet. "It seems I have nothing left to learn from you." She had done the arithmetic of herself by then. 100 days. More than 500 deaths, give or take. The count had stopped meaning anything around the second 100. They had spent 500 murders teaching her, and they had run out of lesson. In the chaos of the dusk, between the scattered units, in the gap where no one was looking, the Gillette twins ended. There was no spectacle to it. They were the most dangerous mages of their generation, and then they simply were not. And Clarice felt no more guilt than she had felt anger at her own fire. Garrett found what was left. He understood at once who had done it, and that he could prove nothing, and that he would have to ride back and report 2 dead weapons, and a girl gone over the line into demon country. He sat with the unanswerable thing all the way home. He had just watched something cross out of the human world, and he could not tell whether he had witnessed the death of everyone or its turning point, and not knowing which was the part that would not let him sleep again. The frontier at night was a good place to disappear because everyone there was busy not dying. Clarice walked down the slope without hiding. She had spent the day watching how humans fought this war. Thin units flung out across the dark, so the demons could only ever kill 20 at a time. The strong ones held back on both sides because whoever showed the great card first lost it to the answer. It was, she thought, a war run by frightened men, and she was the one creature on the field with nothing left to be frightened with. So she went the way no one ran, down toward the trees the demons crossed from, across the line in the dark, while the scattered units watched each other and not the slope. She turned the demons over in her mind as she went, the way she turned everything over now. Long lived past 500 years, the twins had said, drowning in mana, more power in one of them than a human army, and foolish. That was the twins' verdict, and Garrett's, and everyone's. A race handed a god's gift that never once thought to study it, that poured it all outward as violence, and inward as nothing. She suspected the verdict was lazy. People had said the same about a talentless girl. She was not crossing to conquer anything. She had no flag, no grudge against demons she had never met, and behind her, a whole human world that had built her a fire and signed the order with her own family's hand. She owed that world nothing. She owed anyone nothing. She had decided this on the slope, the way you decide to set a weight down, and she meant to keep it that way. No ties, no debts, nothing anyone could ever throw her out of again. She was simply going to the place full of things the world had discarded, because she was one of those now, and she wanted to see who else was down there. She walked in under the trees, humming, looking for someone to talk to and not someone to kill. And in the dark ahead of her, between two trunks, something the size of a story turned its head and looked back. The thing between the trees turned its head and looked at her, and Clarice lifted a hand and waved. It did not wave back. It melted into the dark the way big things do when they decide they would rather watch than be watched. She kept walking anyway, humming, picking her way down the slope into the trees the humans called the magic forest, which was, she had decided, just a forest, ordinary in every way except for the monsters in it. She walked without hiding. That was the whole point. A person who wanted to be found did not creep. So when a loop of rope cinched around her ankle and snapped her up into the canopy, she counted it as a kind of success. She hung upside down, blonde hair pouring toward the leaf litter, and waited to feel her head fill and her sight swim. Neither came. The blood in her did whatever it pleased now, and being turned over meant nothing to it. She filed that away with the quiet pleasure of a woman whose body kept handing her free information. A demon stepped out of the black between two trunks, tall, a head above 6 feet, purple-skinned and black-haired, a long dark sword held low and ready. He looked young. He did not look cruel. "You're human," he said. "Why are you somewhere like this?" "I'm a pitiful, pretty girl who got kicked out of the human pack." She swung gently on the rope. "I came to see how the demons are getting on. You can put me down or leave me up here, if hanging's the local custom. I honestly don't mind which." He studied her a moment longer, then cut the rope. She landed in a neat crouch. Before she could thank him, he had her wrists bound in front of her. "Sneaking through your own forest," she said, watching him work the knot. "That's a sad way to live. I'll take you to the chief." He didn't rise to it. What happens after that, I don't know. Be ready. His name, she would learn, was Unos. She tucked it away and let him lead her into the dark. The camp was about 30 demons and no fire. That told her most of what she needed. 30 bodies in a hollow, some asleep on bare ground. The rest sitting with the stillness of people who had stopped expecting anything. They were cold on purpose. A fire is a thing you light when you mean to still be alive in the morning. Unos brought her before the largest of them. The chieftain sat with his back against a fallen trunk, a great slab of muscle with a bottle in one fist. He looked her over and snorted, then asked, half into the bottle, how a human girl brat had wandered all the way out to the edge of the world. Clarice told him plainly. She'd been thrown out of human society, and she'd come to learn how the demons lived. That earned a rough laugh. And then, because she asked, and because there was nothing left worth guarding, the chief told her what they were. His name was Janus. His clan had done nothing, broken no law, committed no crime. They had simply been disliked by the wrong demon at the wrong council, and on jealousy, dressed up as policy they had been named, and cast out. And because exile alone was too clean, they had been handed an order on the way out the door, cross into human land and attack it. Win a war no exiled clan had ever won, or die fighting it, thrown away by their own people, then pointed at the enemy and told to go be useful, dying. Clarice listened to all of it with her bound hands in her lap. And underneath the listening, something quiet turned over, because she knew this story. She had lived the human edition of it. When the chief finished, he shrugged, as if that was simply how the world was built. And if she didn't care for it, she was welcome to go strike down the Demon King herself, since they plainly couldn't. "What a disappointment you are," Clarice said. The camp went still. A whole clan dragged down under a chief who's already decided to lie down and die politely. "You know what I'll do after you're gone? I'll build you a grave, and I'll carve it deep, so anyone passing can read it. The loser clan sleeps here, disgraced." Janus did not take offense. He laughed instead, a real one, and told Unos to untie her and pour her a drink. He liked the ones who talked like that. The drink didn't soften her, and that was the trouble. She kept at them. She kept asking the one question none of them would say out loud. Why a clan that had been thrown away still snapped to attention the instant the people who threw it away gave an order. She asked it kindly. She asked it cruelly. She asked it until the chief's skin began to darken with rising blood, and then he moved. The punch caught her square in the chest. She felt it the way you feel a heavy door slammed shut on you, total and final, and the world went out, and then it came back. Her body gathered itself off the ground, the broken pieces remembering where they belonged, the gray cloak settling around her shoulders as she rose, ash sifting from the cloth, whole, unmarked. She rolled her neck like someone working out a crick and looked at the chief, who had gone very still. "That's one." He hit her again, a piercing strike straight through her, and again the lights went out, and again they came back. She stood up out of the second death the way a person stands up from a chair, and the 30 demons watching her had stopped breathing. "You can kill a weak little girl all night," she told him, and the brightness was gone from her voice now, something flat and serious, sitting where it had been. "It changes nothing. You can end me, and you still bow to the rotten laws of the home that spat you out. You're no better than the humans. Fawn on the strong, stamp on the weak, lick the hand that throws you away." She let it sit. The hollow had gone graveyard quiet. "You were discarded," she said. "You don't owe that nation a single order, so stop dying for it. Turn around, go west, away from all of it. Just refuse." It was the thing none of them had let themselves think. She watched it land, watched it move through the clan like cold water poured down the spine, the women lifting their heads, the children going still, a hope so long forbidden that hearing it out loud seemed to hurt them. Janus refused it, not because she was wrong, because pride was the one thing the nation had never managed to take from him, and a man stripped of everything else will sometimes die rather than surrender the last of it. He would not run, he made clear. He was a demon of this clan, the Demon King's subject, and he would meet the order standing. But there his voice changed, and he looked at the women and the children, and last of all at his own son, and he said he would not drag them into the grave with him. The ones who wanted to live could live. He freed them to choose. By the gray light before dawn, the clan had split itself in two. On one side stood the ones who would follow Janus, the fighters, the proud, the ones for whom a death chosen beat a life merely permitted. His skin had gone the deep flush of a demon with his blood up. He made no speech. He told the ones staying to live, then turned south toward Esgard, toward the human border and the war that had been built to bury them. Clarice did not stop him. That was the part she would carry afterward. She had handed the whole clan a door, and she stood and watched half of them choose the wall instead, and she let them. She had decided a long time ago that she would not become one more person deciding what these people were allowed to do, not even to save their lives. If they wanted to live, she would take them anywhere on earth. If they wanted to die on their feet, that wanting was theirs. So they marched. The border swallowed them. They did not come back. How it ended reached her later, thin and secondhand. The willing half of the clan had struck the human line at Esgard and fallen there, to the last of them, exactly the way the Order had always meant them to. Janus among them. She had let it happen. She never once pretended otherwise. What remained was the half no one had ever called strong. The women, the children, the old, and Unos, the chief's own son, who had stood at the fork and chosen the road his father named the Coward's Road. He had chosen to live, and it was breaking him. He sat apart with his black sword across his knees and his shoulders shaking, and when Clarice came near, he did not lift his head. "The ones who went on ahead never knew you," he said. "At least they didn't die the way we'd die now, hollow, knowing there was another door and walking past it on purpose." His voice cracked open. "I wanted to live. I looked at the choice and I wanted it. What kind of demon does that make me? I'm weak. That's the whole of it. I'm weak." Clarice let him keep the word. She didn't argue him out of it. She thought, but did not say, that wanting to live was the most honest thing a thrown-away person could feel, and that a day was coming when he would understand his weakness had been the only clear-eyed thing in that whole proud, dying clan. She kept it behind her teeth. Some things a person has to walk all the way to alone, no longer of any clan now. Unos got to his feet, dragged a hand across his face, and asked her where they were going. "West," she told him, "toward the Beastmen country." He warned her off it. "Crossing into Beastmen land broke the law," he said. "The Demon King and the Beast King held a treaty, and walking across that line uninvited was the sort of thing that started wars." "Then we won't go uninvited," Clarice said. "We'll knock first. You greet people before you move into their forest. That's just manners." They went west, and to Clarice's genuine surprise, she enjoyed it. The survivors turned out to be superb on the move. The weak ones, the nation had called them, and these weak ones ran down forest game at a dead sprint, butchered it clean without breaking stride, kept the children fed and the pace unbroken. Grim work, but alive work, and they did it shoulder to shoulder. She spent the days studying them, because watching demons spend magic taught her more than the twins ever had. A demon pours mana into its own body, into muscle and speed, a fist that punches through a torso, a leap that clears 10 meters at a bound. Humans, she saw, did the exact opposite. They funneled everything into raw destruction and left their own bodies undefended, then spent their soldiers like fuel to feed the spells. That single trade, she understood, was the whole answer to how the weaker race had climbed over the stronger one. Her own magic she measured too, and found next to nothing there. Not enough to enhance so much as a fingertip. Flat out, at a full sprint, she could cover 100 meters in maybe 12 seconds. The slowest body in the whole company, children included. The only one among them that could not not be killed, and the feeblest one on the road. She found that funny in a way she didn't bother explaining to anyone. She also caught herself eating when she no longer needed to, and lying down to sleep when she was fairly sure she no longer required it, and she let herself keep doing both. Stop eating because eating is pointless, and soon you stop laughing for the same reason, and stop noticing rivers, and stop being anyone at all. She intended to stay someone, the youngest of them, a girl with light purple skin who came up to about Clarice's chest, and who had already quietly stitched the tear in Clarice's clothes, fell into step beside her. "Miss Clarice," she asked, "why couldn't you stay with the humans anymore?" Clarice thought about lying and decided against it. "My fiancé chose another woman," she said. "And then, to tidy up the loose end, he tried to have me killed. It didn't take." She said it the way you'd report the weather. "So, here I am, walking with you instead. I'd call that a trade-up." The girl beamed and asked why she talked the way she did. So blunt, so unlike a lady. This was simply who she was, Clarice told her, and left the rest, the fire, and the older mind she had woken with inside it, unsaid. Far to the east, in the kingdom that believed it had burned her, the story would not lie down. A girl had been chained to a stake and set alight, and had walked out of the flames whole. Too many people had stood in that square and watched it for the tale to die. It traveled the way fire was meant to and had not. Mouth to mouth, market to hall, each teller adding one colder detail. An unkillable witch, and bound to the witch, like rot creeping up from a wound, were two names. The House of Miller, which had lit the fire, and the House of Gloria, which had handed her over to it. People spoke those names differently now, a little quieter, a little further back from the speaker, as though saying them too loudly might call something across the dark. Neither house knew it yet, but the lie they had told to justify a killing had begun, very slowly, to eat the ones who told it. Back on the road west, the days ran together. After a great many of them, she lost the count and didn't grieve it. The trees thinned and the forest simply ended. It ended at a river, a wide one, sunlit, moving slow and bright between the demon forest at their backs and a different forest on the far bank, one that smelled and sounded faintly wrong, the way a foreign country does before you've set a foot in it. Clarice stopped at the water's edge and understood exactly what she was looking at. Not the end of anything, another border, another frontier, the same as Iscard had been, a line drawn by someone else that she was about to step across as though it weren't there at all. Unos came up beside her, eyeing the far bank with the wariness of a man who knew whose land that was. "When we make the next river, I'm having a proper bath," Clarice announced, to no one and everyone at once. "And Unos, don't you dare peek." He went a darker shade of purple and looked very hard at the trees. On the far side of the water, the Beastman country waited. The water was about 10 meters across and moving slow, and Clarice was already halfway over it before Unos finished telling her to wait. She had left the rest of the clan on the near bank, the women, the children, the old hunters who could put an arrow through a squirrel at 40 paces, and brought only Unos across to look at the land. 2 scouts drew less notice than 30 refugees. That was the theory. The theory lasted right up until her boot found a mossy stone and the river took her legs out from under her. She went under, came up spitting, and was swept a good 20 meters downstream before a purple hand closed on her collar and hauled her out like a wet cat. "You are the slowest, the weakest, and the only one of us who cannot drown," Unos said, holding her cloak out at arm's length to wring it. "Try to act as if it matters. It does matter. I would have walked the whole riverbed and come up on the far side eventually." She squeezed the water out of her hair and grinned, just less gracefully. The far bank was a different country. The dim, sunless demon forest stopped dead at the water's edge, and beyond it, the trees thinned into real daylight. A tilled field, a footpath worn smooth, a line of washing strung between 2 posts. People lived here, settled, ordinary, cultivated people. The path forked 3 ways. Clarice took the one that climbed the hill and started humming a marching tune until Unos caught her sleeve and went still. A child stood on the path ahead, beast-eared, a great foxtail curled behind small legs, watching them with enormous eyes. Clarice lifted a hand and waved. The child turned and ran. "Friendly place," she said, and kept walking toward the lone house on the hill. They never reached the door. Unos went down between one step and the next, not stumbling, falling, his whole great body folding as if a hand had reached into his skull and switched him off. He hit the dirt and writhed, clawing at nothing, and a sound came out of him she had never heard from him before. Not pain, grief. He was somewhere else, dying some death that had already happened or never would. Clarice felt it a heartbeat later, the magic, settling over the hilltop like a held breath. It reached for her too. For half a moment, the sunlit path peeled away, and she was somewhere small and gray. A bare room she half remembered, lying in a narrow bed with the ceiling going dim, an old man's tired body breathing its last in a life she had lived before this one. Then her body threw it off the way it threw off everything. The gray room tore like wet paper, and she was back on the hill, on her knees beside Unos, and he was still screaming. She had one spell, just the one. There was not enough mana in her whole frail body to warm a cup of tea, but she gathered every thread of it into her palm and pressed her hand flat against his chest. The static jolt cracked between them. Unos jerked, gasped, and came back into his own eyes, wild, wet, alive. "Welcome home," she told him. The air in front of the house bent, twisted, and folded a person out of nothing. She was a fox spirit, silver hair, white ears, deep blue eyes, 6 white tails fanned behind her, a robe wound in careful folds. Pale blue fire drifted around her hands like patient animals. She looked from the demon shaking on the ground to the slight human girl crouched over him and named herself Keeper of this boundary, set here to hold the line at the farthest edge of the world. The demon side, she said, was a land for the dead, and the dead had no business crossing. "Turn around," she finished. "Carry your friend back across the water and do not come here again." Clarice rose. She brushed the dirt from her knees, stepped once into the drifting fire, and gave her name. "I am not crossing back," she said. "There is nothing back there for me. No home, no people who would have me. You are standing in front of the only direction I have left." She tilted her head. "So I would much rather we talked." The foxfire flared white. "Then you leave as ash," Serena said. The first fire took Clarice between one breath and the next. The world went white, then went out, and then she was standing again 3 steps back, whole, cloaked, fine gray ash sifting off her shoulders as if she had walked out of a chimney, fully clothed, unmarked, mildly inconvenienced. "That is one," she said, and started walking. Unos came up off the ground with murder in his face, and then stopped, because the girl the fox had just burned to nothing was strolling uphill, brushing soot from her sleeve. He understood it in stages, the way a man works out a card trick. There was nothing here to avenge. He lowered his sword, sat back down, and watched. The second fire was bigger. So was the third. Serena threw everything she had, and every time the light cleared, Clarice reformed a little closer, ash-wreathed and cheerful, counting out loud. "That is 9. That is 20. That is 31. Each death cost the fox spirit. None of them cost Clarice more than a few steps. The pale fire that had drifted so patiently around Serena's hands began to gutter and thin and sputter, a blaze burning down to its last sticks. By 40, Serena was breathing hard, both hands shaking. The foxfire reduced to weak sparks that died before they reached the girl walking calmly through them. Clarice closed the last of the distance, lifted a hand, and took the fox spirit's face gently between her fingers. "You are almost dry," she murmured, like a doctor reading a pulse. "I can feel it. No fire left, and underneath the fire, there you are. You are frightened," she smiled, and it was a child's smile with something very old looking out through it. "I have been on fire before. It really does not take with me." So, she let go. "Shall we have that conversation now?" Serena looked at her for a long moment. Then her shoulders came down, and the last spark went out. The house was small and clean and smelled of dried herbs. Serena sat them at a low table and put a pot on to boil, and the child slipped in from the back room, the same one who had run from them on the path, Karina. She held out a folded robe to Clarice without a word. Clarice took it and turned it over in her hands, baffled. "I do not actually know how this goes on." So the child showed her, small serious hands guiding the folds, wrapping and tucking until the robe sat right. Karina never once looked at Serena. She looked at Clarice the whole time, the way you look at something you have already made up your mind about. Then, tea. Serena poured and dipped her head toward Unos. "You held your blade while I burned her. A demon with patience. I did not believe the word applied to your kind. There was nothing to kill." She kept coming back. He set his cup down. "And I am Unos, not the demon." Over the steam, Serena told them how the beast world was built. Beastmen kept to their own lands and rarely left them, she explained. They were no single nation, but a scatter of tribes, loosely held beneath one crown. Above every quarrel between them sat the Lion King, King Randall, supreme judge of the tribes, his rulings final and beyond appeal, and his judgment had ended her people. The Fox tribe had been accused of something they never did, Serena said, and the Lion King, more afraid of what they might become than sure of what they were, ruled against them on his fear alone. The tribe was dissolved, its people scattered, And she, guardian of nothing now, had been set here to keep a border at the edge of the world, alone, with a borrowed child for company. Karina is not mine, she added. A friend left her with me 10 years ago and swore she would come back for her. She has not. Clarice had gone quiet. I have heard this story, she said at last. Different mouths, the same shape every time. The ones at the top get frightened, so the ones at the bottom get called the danger and thrown out for it. She set her cup down. It was done to his whole clan. It was done to me. Then she asked, not for salt, not yet, for room. She wanted to settle the survivors across the river, the half of the clan that had chosen to live, the women, the children, the old hunters. She was not going to take the land. She was asking for it. Serena stared at her as if she had grown a second head. In all her years on the boundary, no one had ever crossed it and asked. They took, or they died trying. You are a strange creature, she said slowly, but she did not say no. The clan crossed the water in the weeks that followed, and the change was fast enough to watch. They kept a respectful distance from Serena's post, raised their houses on the near slope, and put demon strength to work, felling timber, breaking ground, hunting the magical wilds where the game ran strange and fat. A camp became a row of homes. The row became something that smelled like a village, wood smoke, drying meat, a field coming up green. The discarded half of a clan that had been marched toward death was, very quietly, building a life. Karina took to crossing the river herself, drawn to the noise and the children, and there she made the first real friend of her life, a demon girl her own age and height named Katerina, who attached herself to Karina inside an afternoon and to Clarice with her whole heart. That is Lady Clarice, Katerina told Karina, the first time she pointed her out across the field, with the gravity of a girl revealing a saint. Without her, every one of us would be dead in that forest, all of us. She is the reason we are still here to be friends. Karina watched the slight blonde woman laughing with a hunting party at the tree line and decided privately that she agreed. Clarice came up the hill at dusk with a brace of forest rabbit and a list. Salt, smithing, and cloth, she said, laying the meat on Serena's step. Those are what we need next. I mean to comb the wilds for the rest. Rock salt, or whatever the land is hiding. I hate unfair orders, and I hate being told to sit still, so I would rather we did not sit still. Serena allowed that she could introduce a smith. The salt she would not give. The beds lay on her side of the line, and she meant to keep them. Cloth she knew nothing about. Then she asked the question under all of it. Why the hurry? They were safe here. They were hidden. Why not simply be still and let the world forget them? Because the world does not forget anyone, Clarice said. There is no such thing as hidden. A place that cannot feed and arm itself is not a refuge. It is a slow grave with a nice view. She said it lightly, and that was the unsettling part. Whether she was saving these people or pulling them out of the one safe corner they had into a fight that would have passed them by, even she did not seem fully sure, and she did not pretend to be. The proof came that same evening. Word reached the hill that a beastman had been killed not far off. Only the report, never the thing itself, but it was enough. Karina went white and pressed close to Serena's side. Clarice laughed it off and ruffled the child's ears, and her smile in the failing light was a child's and an old witch's at once. See, she said gently, the world never waits. The smith lived where the forest gave way to bare rock. His hut was a leaning ruin, but the forge beside it was the best built thing for a day in any direction. Stone walls, a true chimney, real glass in the window. The dwarf himself was stout and gruff, and looking at them, the way a man looks at weather he did not order. Clarice introduced herself and came straight to it. She wanted him to forge for the settlement, and she would pay in pelts, meat, and goods. I will not be anyone's slave, Duval said flatly, before she had finished. Buy a slave somewhere else. I do not want a slave. Clarice did not raise her voice. What I want is a respected neighbor. You keep your forge, your name, and your terms. We trade as equals, or not at all. The silence after that ran long. Then Duval jerked his chin at the great demon standing behind her. Let me see his axe. Gainos handed it over without a word. The dwarf turned it once, and his face curdled. You felled trees with a battle axe. You have been felling whole forests with a war blade and a prayer. He looked from the ruined edge to the blistered, calloused hands around him, and something in him shifted. These people did not want to own a smith. They had simply never had one, and badly needed one now. Axes, he said at last, ticking it off. 5 of them, proper ones. Knives, pots, pans, skewers, whatever else you fools have been doing without. You bring me pelts and smoked meat, and hands when I need them. He spat into the dust to seal it. Neighbor. And just like that, the settlement crossed a line it could not be dragged back over. Land, farms, hunters, a guardian at the border, and now a forge. A home with everything a home needs. A place no council and no king had had handed them and no one could throw them out of. The discarded had built themselves somewhere to stand. Clarice all but skipped down the mountain. "A cultured life," she sighed. "At last." Serena watched her go, troubled, aimless, and made up as you go. "What an unsettling creature you are." Clarice only laughed. 3 days later, the home that could not be taken had its first test. It came at a run, an orc, big and winded and frightened, crashing into the settlement with no greeting and no breath to waste. He had been sent, he gasped out, to find the human girl who had crossed the river. The wolf tribe had come to the boundary in force. They had taken the fox spirit who kept it. They had taken Serena. They had taken the child. For one beat, the bright morning held perfectly still. The new houses, the green field, the smoke of a forge that had not even gone cold yet. Then Clarice was already moving, and her voice had gone flat and certain, in a way Yunos had learned to follow without question. "Get my cloak," she said. "We're going to go and get them back." And the home she had just finished building turned, in a heartbeat, into something she would have to leave to save. While Clarice was building a home out of the ash of the world that had thrown her away, that world had already moved on to someone else. Her name was Mizetta, and she had never asked for any part of what was about to happen to her. She was a small girl in a poor village the first time it happened. Her grandmother's back had ached for years, and one afternoon, Mizetta pressed her little hands to the old woman's spine and simply wished the pain gone, and it went. Her grandmother straightened up, astonished, and told the child she felt years younger. After that, the gift only grew. Mizetta healed her parents' worn-out hands, then the neighbors, then anyone at all who came to the door. She did not understand it and did not need to. She only knew that when she healed someone, they smiled at her, and that smile was the whole of what she wanted from the world. An old doctor from beyond the village took her in. He could work no magic at all, but he knew the body and its ailments, and he was honest about the great deal he did not know. Under him, Mizetta turned a child's raw wish into a careful, disciplined art. The day a boy was carried and snake-bitten, the old man laid out his instruments and then set them down again. There was no medicine for the venom, he admitted plainly. He had nothing. Mizetta knelt by the cot, folded her hands over the swelling, and poured everything she had into the boy until his breathing eased and the gray went out of his face. Word of that traveled. The common people began to call her the healing saint, not the nobles, the people, the ones she had actually saved. And a name like that, spoken in enough mouths, eventually reaches a great house. The Miller house sent for her, and the second son, Eckhart, asked her to marry him. Mizetta said yes. No one told her he already had a betrothed, and it never once occurred to her to ask. They moved her into a villa and set a butler to teaching her how to be a noble. She learned which fork, which bow, which words to a baron, and which to account. The lesson the man repeated most was the one she could never quite take to heart. Stop apologizing. Stop lowering your head. Stop being so humble. You are above these people now. Mizetta nodded and tried and felt, with every passing day, a little further from the girl who had knelt by a snake-bitten boy. Then, Eckhart came to her, white as a sheet, and the story fell out of him in pieces. His father was dead, dropped lifeless on the steps of his own house in front of 200 people, with no wound on him anywhere. And the execution all those people had gathered to watch. Mizetta heard, for the very first time, what it had been. There had been a girl, a noble daughter named Clarice, Eckhart's real betrothed, branded talentless, and then branded something worse, a fraud of false blood, which was a thing you could lawfully burn for. The plan, Eckhart admitted, had been simple and clean. Burn the worthless girl, clear the path, and present the famed healing saint as the fitter bride. Mizetta had been the reward at the end of it. Mizetta had been the reason. Except the worthless girl had not burned. She had walked out of the fire untouched. The old count had fallen dead where he stood, and now a rumor was running the kingdom faster than any rider could carry it, that the Millers had tried to murder an unkillable witch, and she had simply walked away from them. The house's name was rotting by the hour, and the Gloria name was rotting right beside it. Eckhart sat there pitying himself, muttering that he wondered whether he had ever really known Clarice at all. Mizetta listened to him and said nothing. She thought instead about the wedding she had been promised, a wedding built on top of a girl's murder, and about the girl who had refused in the end to die for it. It settled into her conscience and sat there like a stone. A marquis settled what was left to settle. Leopold arrived without being invited and informed them, in his flat, unhurried way, that his house would be taking charge of the two of them now. The healing saint's name was worth a great deal, he observed, and a thing of worth ought to be sold. Hers and Eckhart's, both. A marquis outranks a count. There was no one left in the room with the standing to tell him no. Mazetta understood, watching his two large eyes move over her the way a man reads a label off a crate, that her station had changed yet again, and that in this one, she had even less say than the last. Leopold's lands swallowed her whole. After 3 days left alone in a villa the size of a castle, two beautiful young people came for her, a brother and a sister who finished each other's sentences and smiled with nothing at all behind it. They called themselves the Prodigy Twins, and they walked her down into the dark. There was a man in a cell, shackled and already hurt. Mazetta never saw how it had been done. The harm had happened somewhere she had not been, before she was ever brought down the stairs. The twins explained, almost bored, that he was most likely innocent. Some small piece traded into a trap, so the famous healing saint would have something to mend. Then they asked idly why she was just standing there. Was the great saint not going to heal the man right in front of her? Mazetta was already moving. She crossed the cell, knelt at the prisoner's side, and put her hands to the worst of it. "I will heal you," she told him, low and steady. "It may hurt, so please try not to move." The wounds closed under her palms. The bleeding stopped. The man held himself still and did not cry out, and when it was finished, he was whole again. The twins watched without the faintest interest in whether she had succeeded, and in that bored silence, Mazetta finally understood the shape of the thing she was caught inside. A game with cruelty for its own sake, and no door anywhere out of it. On the way back up, almost carelessly, the sister let a name drop, Clarice. When Mazetta turned and pressed her, what did that mean? What did she know? The twins only laughed at her for being curious about the very girl she had been brought in to replace, and told her nothing. Leopold moved her again, this time into his own castle, up to a high bedroom where his wife lay wasted thin with a long sickness. He told her, flat as ever, that the twins had vouched for her work, so she would heal the woman. Mazetta could not simply force it. The wife was far too weak to survive a hard, fast cure, so for 5 careful days, Mazetta fed the healing in slowly, a little at a time, coaxing the body back instead of dragging it. On the 5th day, the woman sat up on her own, with color in her face again. The wife took Mazetta's hand and thanked her with a real, surprising warmth. Her husband only acted cold, she confided. He made himself easy to hate on purpose, so that she alone would be left to love him. And one day, set against other nobles, Mazetta might even find him the better man. "He is a hard person," the woman said, smiling up at her, "but he is not the one he pretends to be." Mazetta smiled back and kept her doubt to herself. She wondered, walking out, whether the gentle woman in that bed was simply being deceived. After that, Leopold sold her. He spread word of the healing saint far and wide, and sent her touring the kingdom manor to manor, mending the aches and injuries of nobles, with a maid and knights and a guide, his own nephew, to handle her like a precious shipment. Some of those nobles met her with open contempt. Whenever they did, the nephew simply gathered her things and walked her out without healing anyone, explaining that you did not carry a name worth this much only to let it be smeared cheap. Tour after tour, she cured what other healers had sworn could not be cured, and the people around her stopped doubting her and began to watch her with something close to awe. One old noblewoman, drenched in perfume, patted her hand after a cure and told her she must have been born for this work. Inwardly, Mazetta rejected it completely. She had not been born to mend rich strangers in fine beds. She had been a village girl who liked to watch people smile, and she could no longer remember the last time anyone she healed had smiled at her at all. Then, Leopold sent her to the war. In the north, at a place called Esgard, the kingdom's armies bled against the things that came out of the demon forest, and the Marquis wanted his saint seen on that ground. Mazetta went without feeling much of anything about it. She was crossing the edge of the field when she found them, the twins, the two beautiful prodigies who had walked her down into the dark and let that name fall, laid out still among the dead, gone, and no one near them able to say quite how it had happened. Mazetta stood over the two bodies far longer than she meant to. She had not loved them. They had been cruel to her, and to a great many others before her, and still it turned something cold in her chest to see the pair who had seemed so utterly untouchable simply ended like this, in the mud at the end of the world. The medical tents were drowning. Wounded men lay in long rows, and the healers tending them had burned themselves hollow and fallen hopelessly behind. Mazetta walked in and began to cast one strong spell after another, more of them, and faster than the spent healers had believed a single person could manage, until by the end of the day, there was no one left under the canvas who still needed her hands. While she rested, Eckhart found her. He was steadier than the man who had wept about his father, surer of himself now. He had taken up Leopold's own habit of gathering useful people, no matter where they were born, and he had two of them with him. One was a quiet man named Nova, the very prisoner she had healed in that cell, come at last to thank her for his life. Mazetta met his gratitude with the same tired calm she met everything with now. The other was a brash young swordsman with blonde hair and a greatsword as tall as he was. He looked her over and grinned. "So the saint's all business," Jack said, driving his blade point down into the dirt. "Name's Jack. We'll be seeing plenty of each other, unless this one over here bungles the job." Eckhart let the rudeness pass and laid out their task in a lower voice. They had been sent here, the three of them, to hunt down the demon leader itself. That night, Mazetta could not sleep, and she went out to look at the battlefield under the moon. The moon hung swollen and too large that night, laying long shadows all the way down the slope, and the demon forest stood black and waiting at the bottom of it. And then she saw the girl. A lone figure came down the hill, light on her feet, long blonde hair gone pale in the moonlight. She walked the way a person walks through their own garden, unhurried, untroubled, weaving between the scattered soldiers as though not one of them were quite real. None of the men looked up. None of them seemed to see her there at all. Mazetta stood frozen at the top of the rise and watched that small bright head drift down through a whole army toward the one place on the entire front that every grown soldier on it feared. The girl did not slow at the tree line. She walked straight on into the dark of the demon forest, alone, unarmed, unafraid, the way Mazetta might have wandered into her own kitchen, and the black closed over her and she was gone. Mazetta did not understand what she had just watched. She only knew the back of her neck had gone cold, and that she went on standing there a long while after the girl had vanished, staring at the place in the dark where a fearless blonde girl had stepped out of the world and into the one part of it that nothing ever came back from. The truth reached her in the morning, passed around the camp the way every rumor of the war was passed. The prodigy twins were dead, and the one being blamed for it was a girl, a noble daughter named Clarice, who had appeared out of nowhere and then vanished into the demon forest and could not be found by anyone. Mazetta stood very still while the name went by her, Clarice, the talentless girl, the fraud of false blood the houses had burned to clear a space for her, the worthless thing the whole world had agreed was worth nothing, agreed so completely that the girl's own family lit the fire and 200 people came out to watch it. That girl. And Mazetta knew, with a cold certainty that closed slowly around her heart, exactly who she had watched walk down the hill the night before. Not a witch, not a monster. A girl with bright hair who had strolled through a war and into a dark that swallowed whole armies, alone and entirely unafraid, because there was nothing left in any world that could touch her anymore. They had called Clarice worthless. They had set her on fire for it, and she had walked out and gone free. While Mazetta, the chosen one, the fitter bride, the healing saint they had murdered a girl to make room for, stood here in a stranger's army, wearing a stranger's clothes, owned and leashed and sold off manor to manor and front to front, with no door out and no say in any of it. The world had burned the wrong girl, and of everyone who had cheered the fire on, only Mazetta had just watched the proof of it walk past her into the dark. She did not say a word about it. She folded it up small and quiet inside her, in the same place the guilt already lived, the knowledge that somewhere out there, the girl she had replaced was walking free, and that she herself, the one who had won, had never once been anything more than a prisoner who was allowed to heal. Across the river, in the settlement that had been bare ground a month before, two wooden swords cracked together, and one of them went flying. Katerina shook out her stinging hand and went to pick it up. She was 18, demon-born, which on her people meant she still looked like a girl, and she had been begging for these lessons for days. Yuno stood over her, unhurried, his long black sword left sheathed at his hip, while he fixed her grip with 2 fingers. He told her, dry, that he had been far clumsier than this at her age. Clarice watched from a stump at the edge of the yard and decided that was almost certainly a kind lie. Then a shadow came up the path, and Gainos came up it after, his hard face set. "A moment," the big axe bearer said. "There's an orc here. He's asking for Lady Clarice." The orc had to stoop to get under the trees. He stood a full 3 meters, pink-skinned, tusk, broad as a doorway, and he was shaking. The demons had drifted in around the yard at the word orc, and he plainly expected to be eaten on the spot. He gave his name in a very small voice for such a large creature, Montego. He had come from his village, half dead on his feet, because a fox woman named Serena had told him to find Clarice and no one else. Then he told them why, and the yard went quiet. Wolves had come down on his village, he said. Wolf beastmen, fast and clawed, and they had taken the place whole. They had killed 3 of his people and penned the rest. Later, they had carried off a fox child named Karina. Later still, they had taken Serena. And Serena, before the door shut on her, had used her magic to slip Montego loose and pointed him across the river. Find Clarice, she had told him. She will come. Clarice was already on her feet. She did not make a speech of it. She said she was going to go and get them back. And then she looked at Unos, because she had learned that he liked to be asked. She asked him what he would do. He gave her 2 reasons, holding up a finger for each. 1, he wanted to be a good neighbor to that fox woman. 2, and he did not bother reaching for a third, because the second was the whole of it. She was going. That was all of it. Not one of the demons asked what was in it for them. Not one asked how many wolves there were, or how far, or whether the fox woman was worth the walk. They had been a hunted, discarded people when she found them, ordered by their own kind to lie down and die, and she had given them a river and a roof and a reason. Now she was walking towards something dangerous, so they were walking too. The whole yard simply moved. Gainos hefting his axe, Katarina forgetting her sore hand, the rest falling in behind her without a word needing to pass. Once, on a stone square far to the east, a family had handed Clarice to the fire, and not one of them had spoken to stop it. She stood now in a yard full of monsters who would not let her go into danger alone, and she thought, in the flat way she thought about most things, that the sum of who loved her had come out very strange. She did not say any of that. She told Montego to lead the way. The walk to the wolf village took 2 days, and Clarice spent most of it riding on Montego's shoulder. It had not been her idea, exactly. It had been the plain fact that she could not keep up. Her body was 18 and had never been strong, and on a hard march across open country, she fell behind a line of demons without even trying. Slower, she noted without much shame, than an orc child would have been. So Montego had scooped her up like she weighed nothing, settled her on his huge shoulder, and kept telling everyone in earshot how light Lady Clarice was, as though it were a small miracle. She asked him, up there, whether it was true that orcs were farmers. She had carried an old idea of orcs from somewhere, a half-memory of another life that had them as snarling monsters, and the gentle giant under her did not fit it at all. Montego said it was true. His people had been fierce once, long ago, but the stronger tribes had hunted the violent ones until only the mild ones were left to have children, and after enough generations, the fierceness had simply bred out of them. Now they grew wheat and shared it across the whole village and were no good at all at fighting back. He said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse. Lady Clarice must be someone very important, he insisted, for the 3rd time that day. I'm not important, she told him. I'm just very cute. He took this seriously and agreed. They crossed the river out of the demon realm, passed through the quiet forest that had been Serena's to guard, and came out onto a wide plain under an open sky. Somewhere past a low rise, Montego said, his voice dropping. The village waited. And those folk, he added, killed his people without thinking twice about it. Clarice patted the side of his great pink head and told him not to worry. She did not tell him that she expected nothing good at all from the wolves. She only hoped, the way a person hopes against the weather, that they might turn out to be reasonable. She was not counting on it. From the top of the rise, they lay flat in the grass and looked down at the village. It was bigger than it had any right to be. Everything built oversized, doors and halls scaled for things that stood half again as tall as a man. Beyond the buildings ran a broad field of wheat going gold, a branch of the river, a dark line of forest at the back, wooden houses, a wide meeting hall at the center. Unos counted the guards in a low voice. 2 wolves at the meeting hall, 1 at the chief's house, none at all on the grain store or in the fields. The meeting hall, Montego whispered, was where they had penned everyone. The chief's house was where they had taken Serena. Clarice pulled the borrowed fox-style robe closer around her, the one Serena had lent her weeks ago and never asked back, and thought it through. Then she told them the plan, and it was mostly her walking in alone. A frail human girl strolling up to the gate was the least threatening thing in the world, and being underestimated was the only weapon she had ever reliably owned. She would go in, ask to see the chief, and find out what kind of creature he was. If the wolves turned out decent, she would walk back out and wave, and they would talk like neighbors. If they did not, and she did not think they would, Unos would send up a signal. She could not make a flashy one herself. Her own magic was barely a candle, so the signal would be his. When she gave the word, he was to throw something bright into the sky and bring the demons down on the village, clear the wolves out, spare maybe one to answer questions, and put down anyone who raised a hand to her first. Montego fretted about her going in with nothing at all. Nothing to worry about, Clarice said, which, in her particular case, was very nearly true. Then, she stood up in plain view of the whole village and started down the hill. Inside the chief's house, Serena had been a prisoner for 5 days, and she was running out of patience faster than the orcs were running out of food. The wolves had penned 30-some orc villagers in the meeting hall, gentle, frightened farmers, weakening now, their shared stores nearly gone. Twice a day Serena counted them, and twice a day she told herself, silently and fiercely, that Clarice would come. She only needed her to come soon. A wolf warrior hauled her up before the chief again. Zamba was a slab of a creature, a head taller than the orc, fanged and clawed, and he had a habit of pacing his own hall as if the floor owed him something. He pressed her the same way he had pressed her every day, to join him, to lend her name and her fox magic to his cause. He dangled the old wound in front of her like bait. "Help me," he said, "and I will give the scattered fox people a homeland again." Then a second fox stepped out of the shadow behind him, and Serena went cold. One tail, where Serena had 6. It was Stella, Karina's mother, who had walked away from her own daughter 10 years ago and left Serena to raise the child, and here she was, now on the wolf's side, pleading. She said she had never truly cast Karina off, that she had had no choice back then, that the 3 of them together could make the fox people whole again. Serena cut her down to size in a single sentence and turned her face away. It was Zamba, in his temper, who let the rest of it slip, and the room got bigger and colder when he did. His tribe had made a bargain, not with beastmen, with humans. The humans would arm him, give him real strength, and in exchange, he would hand them the weak tribes as property, the orcs as livestock, the harpies and the Taurus folk as slaves to be sold off east. With that human steel at his back, he meant to march on the Lion King himself, King Randall, and take the whole beast world for the wolves. Serena had thought she was caught in one cruel chief's raid. She understood, all at once, that she had stumbled into the edge of something far larger. The human world she had been told to fear was already reaching its hand into the beastlands, and Zamba was only the glove on it. He slammed the floor and demanded her answer. She refused him again, and then a wolf burst in, flustered, to report that a human girl had come to the gate. A strange little human asking for the chief by name, claiming to be an acquaintance of Serena's. Serena almost laughed. She knew exactly who it was. Clarice walked into the village like she was out for a stroll, and not one wolf stopped her until she wanted to be stopped. The scale of the place struck her as funny. Every door a giant's door, every step built for legs longer than her whole body. She felt rather like a girl who had wandered into the wrong storybook. At the meeting hall, she called up to a guard and asked sweetly to be taken to whoever was in charge. They brought her to the chief's house. Zamba sat at the far end of it. Serena sat across from him, playing the sullen prisoner, and beside the wolf perched a one-tailed fox woman Clarice had never seen. She did not waste the entrance. She smiled up at the chief. "I'm the one who raided your nice new village," she said. "The ringleader you're looking for. My name's Clarice. No more and no less. Just a beautiful girl." It was bait, and he took it. He crossed the hall in a blink, got a clawed hand around her throat, and slammed her into the wall, snarling to know what she was and who had sent her. That was when Serena spoke up from her seat, calm, almost bored, and told Clarice the one thing she most wanted said out loud, that Zamba's people had cut a deal with humans. Beastmen traded for weapons, orcs as livestock, the rest as slaves. All of it sold east for the strength to bring down the Lion King. Clarice, pinned to the wall by her neck, began to laugh. "You're a coward," she said, light and cheerful, like she was remarking on the weather. "Too scared of the Lion King to fight him straight, so you went crawling to humans who'll never keep one promise to a mutt like you." She let the grin widen. "I hate violence, but even violence beats taking tea with a loser." So he killed her. It was a quick, ugly thing, and then it was over, and the result was the only part that mattered. A moment later, she was standing again, whole, brushing fine gray ash off the borrowed robe, looking faintly put out at the interruption. He killed her once more. She came back once more and asked mildly if that was honestly all he had. Every time he struck her down, the same thing happened, which was nothing. She simply returned, smiling, and said something to make it worse. The chief's certainty started to come apart in his hands. Serena watched it crack. The one-tailed fox stared at the reviving girl as though the floor had dropped out of the world. Then Clarice, somewhere in the middle of dying for the 5th or 6th time, caught Serena's eye and gave the word. Serena's foxfire went off like a struck match the size of a house. The walls blew outward, the roof came apart, pale blue fire tearing through the timber, and Clarice, standing right in the heart of it, vanished into the blast along with everything else. When the smoke thinned, Clarice climbed up out of the wreckage, laughing. The blast had never been meant to kill her. Serena had known perfectly well it could not. Aiming the fire through Clarice was a lie told for an audience, so that Zamba and Stella would see the fox seem to turn on her own ally and never be sure, after, whose side Serena was truly on. Stella had bought it whole. She cried out in horror, certain she had just watched Serena murder the strange girl, and she did not understand any part of it. Serena did not stop to explain. She caught the older fox by the arm and dragged her clear of the burning timber, out into open air, keeping one eye fixed on the wolf the whole way, as the only thing in the yard that actually mattered. Zamba had been thrown back by his own roof coming down. He came up fast, too fast for something his size, roaring at Serena to say what game she thought she was playing. Clarice answered for her, because she could not resist. "It's far too fine a day," she called down from the rubble, "to sit cooped up in a house a fox set on fire." She spread her hands at the broken wall and the gold field beyond it. "The wind's soft, the wheat's shining. Come out and walk in it, loser dog." He killed her for it. The result, again, was nothing. She stood up out of the ash, whole, dusting herself off, and asked him, almost kindly, whether that was really the best a wolf chief could do. Something went out of Zamba then, and something worse came into him. He was a creature whose whole life had been built on being the strongest thing in any room, and he had just met a little human girl he could not kill, no matter how many times he did it. He lunged at her again, all claw and fury, nothing behind it now but the helpless rage of a man swinging at a flood. His claw never reached her. A black sword came out of nowhere and took the claw off clean. It happened between one breath and the next. The lunging arm, then the arm with nothing on the end of it, the severed claw lying in the trampled wheat, and Zamba staggering back, not from pain so much as from disbelief. Unos stood where the blow had landed, the long black blade held low at his side, having put himself square between the chief and the girl. He had not waited for a signal. He had been watching the whole time, he said, and he had hated every second of it. And he admitted in his flat, grave way, a little angry now. He glanced once at Clarice, taking in the singed fox robe and the ash. He pulled the dark cloak from his own shoulders and tossed it to her. "Put this on for now," he said. "Those borrowed clothes have had enough." She caught it and wrapped it around herself, and for once did not argue. Then he turned back to the wolf. Zamba demanded to know what he was. Unos did not answer the question. He stepped in and kicked the chief, one kick, and sent the 3-meter creature flying sideways across the field to roll through the wheat like something a child had thrown. It was not a fight, that kick. It was an answer. It said plainly how far apart the two of them stood, and it was meant to. Zamba dragged himself up. Unos told him, evenly, to say his own name first, before it was too late to bother, to show some scrap of pride, since even a little girl had stood here laughing at him. The wolf bared what was left of his teeth and gave it, naming himself the wolf who would devour him. Unos gave his own name back, quiet, the way you lay down a card you have been holding all along. "I was told not to kill you." He let it sit a moment. No one said a word about not beating you half to death. Behind him, Clarice pulled the borrowed cloak tighter and settled in to watch, already certain of how this would end. Serena held Stella back at the field's edge. The wheat bent gold around them, the house burned, and in the middle of it, the two of them squared off. The wolf braced. Unos lifted the black sword, and it began. The fight lasted about as long as it took Clarice to decide it wasn't one. Zamba came in fast. 3 meters of muscle and gray fur crossed the trampled wheat in a few strides, claws out, and Unos simply wasn't where they landed. He slid past the first swing. He ducked the second. He let the third pass over his shoulder close enough to stir his hair, and he never once turned the edge of the black sword toward the chief. He hit him with the flat of it instead, with an elbow, with the heel of his hand. Quick, clean blows that didn't cut and didn't need to. Clarice watched from the field's world's edge with the borrowed cloak pulled around her, and thought about the strongest knight back in the kingdom where she'd been born, the man everyone swore could not be beaten. She decided Unos would have bored him to death. He moved like the fight was already over, and he was only waiting for the wolf to catch up. The chief caught up. He stopped swinging and started shouting, demanding, over and over, to know what Unos even was, his certainty coming apart a little more with every blow he couldn't land. Unos gave him almost nothing back. "Names are already traded," he said, sliding off another wild swipe. "If you've got something to say it after you admit you've lost. Until then, you're the one trying to kill me, so keep trying." Past the houses, the rest of it was already ending. A brief storm of shouting and steel, somewhere out of sight, and then quiet. The village had fallen fast. Clarice settled in to watch the chief flail, comfortable and unhurried, certain of how it would go. She did not know yet that on the far side of the burning village, in a granary built far too large for the handful of people it fed, two of her own had just pulled open a door and found something locked inside. Maya hauled the granary door back and stepped aside, spear up. Katerina covered her from 15 paces, exactly the way Unos had drilled her, heart going hard. The granary was the largest building in the village by far. High timber walls, sacks stacked to the rafters, enough stored grain to carry well over 100 bodies through a winter, though barely 30-some orcs had ever lived here. For a moment, it seemed empty. Then Maya's head turned. Someone was inside, not a wolf. It was Karina. She was folded down small between two stacks of grain, knees to her chest, fox ears flat, the big tail wrapped around her like she was trying to take up no room at all. She didn't startle when she saw them. She barely lifted her head. Katerina knew her story in pieces, and the pieces hurt. Given up as a baby, left with Serena to raise, and then, after 10 years, taken back by the very parents who had thrown her away, dragged here, locked in a barn, and forgotten while the grown-ups played at war. When Katerina crouched in front of her and asked if she was hurt, Karina answered in a thin, hollow voice that she only wanted to see Serena, that she didn't even understand why she was here. Katerina slapped her. It wasn't hard, but it cracked across the quiet and snapped Karina's head around, and her eyes finally focused, wide and stunned. "Don't," Katerina said, and her own voice was shaking. "Don't sit there waiting for someone to come fix you. Nobody's coming to do that. I know, because I waited too," she told her then, fast, low, all of it spilling out at once. Her own parents had walked into human land knowing they would die, because the clan's pride said a warrior met death standing, and they had chosen that over staying alive for her. She remembered the morning they left. She remembered being told to be proud. She had hated them for it ever since, and she had spent a long time afterward being exactly what Karina was being right now. A weight, a thing other people carried, sitting still and waiting for someone to come along and tell her she mattered. "And then Lady Clarice and Unos got hold of me," she said. "And you know what nobody did? Nobody told me I mattered. They told me to decide what I wanted, and then they made me go get it myself." Karina just stared at her, the slap still bright on her cheek, fox ears trembling. "It hurt," Katerina admitted, quieter. "Choosing hurts more than waiting does, but waiting's how you stay a thing that gets locked in a barn and forgotten. I'm done being that. I'd rather bleed for something I picked." Serena asked Lady Clarice for help. "That's why we came. That's why all of this is happening. Because of you." Katerina leaned in. "So I'm going to ask you the only question that counts. Do you want to be the thing people carry? Do you want to be Lady Clarice's burden?" A flinch. Small, but there. "Because I won't be," Katerina said. "Not ever. I came on this, so I wouldn't be dead weight to her. That's what I chose. Now you choose." She sat back on her heels, breathing hard, and her voice dropped almost gentle. "What do you want? Not Serena. Not your parents. You." For a long moment, Karina didn't move. The dust drifted in the slatted light. Maya stood guard at the door and said nothing, letting the two of them have it. Katerina didn't fill the silence. She had said her piece, and she knew from her own life that the next part couldn't be done for anyone. That was the whole point of it. And then, slowly, the small head came up. The tail loosened from around her knees. Something behind the wide eyes shifted, the first flicker of a girl asking herself a question she had never once been allowed to ask. Not who would keep her, but who she wanted to be. She uncurled. She got her feet under her. She stood, swaying a little, and stayed standing. She didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in 10 years, she was looking for it on her own. By the time Katerina brought Karina down to the field, the chief was nearly finished. They came across the trampled wheat, Karina on her own 2 feet now, Katerina at her shoulder, Maya in front with the spear. Serena turned at the sight of the girl and said it plainly, the way she said everything. The wolf chief and the one-tailed fox woman beside him were Karina's birth parents, Stella and Zamba, the two who had given her away. Karina looked at them like she was reading a sign in a language she'd decided to forget. On the field, Zamba made his last move. His body swelled, fur thickening, frame stretching, the change taking only a few seconds and carrying him from a tall man's height to something past 2.5 meters. All of it bent on one last killing rush. It bought him nothing. Unos stepped in. When he stepped back, the chief had one leg and was already going down, and a single blow put him out cold before he hit the dirt. It was over that fast. The grass took the body. There was nothing to see in it but a big shape falling. The fox woman screamed. She threw herself down beside him, sobbing, begging them not to kill her daughter's father in front of the child, to have mercy, to think of Karina, to stop. Clarice laughed. It came out bright and genuine and entirely without warmth, and she didn't bother to hide it. "Of course I'm laughing," she said, when the woman stared at her. "It's a little late in the day for a lecture on mercy, don't you think?" She tilted her head. "You sat right there while other people were torn apart. Montego's village, Serena, 5 days in a cage. Not a tear for any of it. And now, your husband's the one on the ground, and suddenly there's a child to think of." She brushed a flake of ash from her sleeve. "You don't get to find your heart at the exact moment it'd be convenient." Stella had no answer. She only clutched at the fallen chief and wept. From across the field, Jade came jogging up, curved sword still out, and reported it done. 11 wolves dealt with, the last of them confirmed, the village clear. The ones who'd come to raid and kill, he noted, had gotten the same in return. Clarice nodded and looked back at the girl who had walked down the hill on her own legs. Karina walked forward and stopped a few steps from the two who had made her. She looked at the weeping foxwoman and at the broken shape on the ground, and there was nothing on her small face at all. When she spoke, it was the first full thing anyone had heard her say, and her voice didn't shake. "Serena is my mother," she said, "not them. I don't know them." Then she turned to Clarice and asked her to kill them. "Both of them. Here." She said it flat and small, the way a child asks for a door to be shut. And that was the worst part of it. Stella made a wretched sound. Serena went still. Clarice crouched down to the girl's level, slow, and for a moment she didn't say anything at all. She had been on the other end of this once, tied to a stake, surrounded by people who had decided she was a thing to be disposed of. Every face she knew turned away. She knew exactly how cheap a life could be made to look when the people who owned it stopped wanting it. She thought, not for the first time, that the world was a hell laid out flat in every direction, and that a child this young already knew the quickest way through. It was to ask someone else to do the cutting. "No," she said, "I won't." Karina's eyes came up, confused. Karina asked her why. The single word, small and confused, as if mercy were the strange thing and the killing were ordinary. "They threw you away. That's true, and it's theirs, and it doesn't wash out." Clarice kept her voice even. "But if I open them up for you tonight, here's what you learn. That the way you end an argument about family is with blood. That whoever's strongest gets to decide who's worth keeping." She shook her head slowly. "That's the exact lesson the people who burned me taught. I crawled out of a fire to stop being someone who lives by it. I'm not going to hand it to a 10-year-old like a gift." A faint, tired smile. "You asked what you want. Start with wanting something better than they wanted for you." She straightened up. She did not look at the foxwoman crying in the dirt, and she did not look at the man Unos had left breathing on purpose. Whatever this cost her in the girl's eyes, she would carry it. It was, she thought, the cheapest thing she'd been asked to carry all day. Karina said nothing more, but she stepped back from her birth parents, and she stepped closer to Clarice, and that answered the only question that had ever mattered. Unos crouched by the downed chief and frowned. He told Clarice, low, that he might have overdone it. Left like this, the wolf would bleed out before he could say a word. That mattered, because Clarice wanted the word. "I kept one of them on purpose," she said. "A dead man tells you nothing. This one's still got a whole story in him." She nodded at Jade. "Close the wound, fast." It was done quickly and without ceremony. The bleeding stopped. The chief kept breathing. No one lingered over the doing of it. When the pain dragged Zamba halfway back toward waking, Unos simply put him under again with one tap, patient as a man settling a horse. Serena dealt with the other problem. Stella was still sobbing, still pleading, working herself toward hysterics, and a hysterical prisoner was no use to anyone. The fox spirit laid 2 fingers against the woman's brow, said something soft, and Stella slumped into sleep mid-cry. Quiet, at last. A heavy crashing came through the trees, and Montego arrived at a frightened run, tusked and huge and half-bent with worry, asking in his small, careful voice what they were doing, whether it was over, whether it was safe. Clarice told him it was. Then she told them all to bring the chief and the woman, and walked them away from the dying house toward open ground where she could think. They sat in a circle with the wolf chief at the center of it, and the warmth went out of Clarice's voice entirely. Karina, sitting close at her side now, asked quietly why they'd left a wolf alive at all after everything. Clarice told her the truth, that a corpse couldn't answer questions, and tonight she had questions worth more than a body. Karina took that and let it go. Stella woke and started up again, shrill and uncooperative, and Clarice had no patience left for it. "I'm really not a fan of screaming," she said, and gagged the woman herself, brisk and unbothered. Maya looked faintly sick at it. Clarice didn't care. Order first. She laid the questions out plainly, 3 of them. Who was the human behind this? How large the thing they'd walked into really was, and how Stella had ever known where to find Serena after the Fox clan had been scattered to the wind 10 years back. Zamba, broken and emptied out, answered all of it. The human, he told them, was a noble of the lowest kingdom, a baron whose lands sat right up against the beastman frontier, a man with no love at all for the Lion King's rule. His name was Baron Spade. He was the hand reaching in from the human side, and he was the reason a wolf chief had ever dreamed this big. And it was big. This raid, Zamba's 12, was nothing, a finger of it. The real shape was a coalition. 5 wolf clans and 4 other beastman tribes, already bound together, already moving. The wolves at this village had only been the part that touched Karina and Serena. Clarice turned it over without a flicker. She asked Serena about the Lion King's rule these days, and the fox spirit admitted her own knowledge was a decade stale. She'd been alone on the border too long to say. Then the gag came off Stella for one question, and she gave up the last piece in a dull, defeated voice. The one who had told her where Serena was hiding had not been a wolf at all. It had been a leopard woman, a clever, close aide to the Lion King himself. Her name was Rex Ash. Clarice sat very still, a human baron pushing in from the outside, and the Lion King's own aide feeding secrets out from the inside. 2 hands, 2 directions, around a throne she had no stake in whatsoever. She filed both names away, neat and permanent, the way she'd once filed the names of everyone who watched her burn. Rex Ash, she said, mostly to herself. Remember that one. Montego shifted his great weight and asked, in his timid way, what they should do now. Clarice looked at the circle, the broken chief, the sleeping fox, the girl who'd chosen her own family that afternoon, the orc giant waiting on her word, and let out a slow breath. I genuinely hate fighting, she said. I want that on the record. A dry, tired half smile. But wanting peace and getting it are 2 different jobs. So we don't wait for the next push. We get ready for it. The fire popped. Out past the embers of a chief's house, 2 names sat in the dark and waited. A baron from a human kingdom and a leopard at a king's right hand. And the game, Clarice already knew, had just gotten a great deal bigger than one wolf in the wheat. Clarice had heard the tax twice now, and both times the numbers had sat wrong in her stomach. The orcs gave the magistrate a wagon of wheat in spring and another in autumn, enough to feed 35 people for a year, because orcs ate 3 times what a smaller beastman ate. In return, the Lion King's soldiers were supposed to ride out if Sutton was ever in danger. So she asked Montego the simple thing. In all his years, how many times had those soldiers actually come? He counted on his fingers and ran out of memory long before he ran out of fingers. Never. Not in his life. Not in his father's. That was all she needed. The amount never changed, no matter the harvest. The soldiers never came. The king never sent so much as a word. Either the king had no idea this village existed, or somebody on the road between Sutton and the throne was quietly eating the difference and making sure no one important ever rode out to check. She'd have bet the whole granary on the somebody. Your wheat leaves here, she said, brushing a fleck of sawdust off the big dark cloak that still hung on her like a tent. And somewhere out on that road, it stops being yours and never quite becomes the king's. And whoever it stops with has spent years making very sure no one comes asking why. Montego's face fell. He asked her, the way he asked her everything now, what they should do. She didn't answer with an order. She handed the question back to him. It was his village, his wheat, his people. So what did he want to do about it? Not what would she do? What did he want? He thought about it a long time. This enormous, gentle creature who had spent his whole life being told what to carry and where. Then he said, very quietly, that he wanted it to stop. By that afternoon, the village of Sutton had placed itself under her protection. On the hill that night, the watch sat in pairs, and Maya could see in the dark better than she ever had. It was a demon thing, Clarice had explained. They gathered magic in their eyes without knowing they did it, and the more they used it, the sharper it got. Maya turned her spear over in her lap and watched the tree line resolve out of the black, and thought about how far she'd come from the Unifiliza warrior who'd been ordered to charge a human line and die for the pride of it. Unos, beside her, said she'd changed. The old Maya would have curled her lip at the idea of standing guard over a pack of orcs. "You've changed too," she told him, and he didn't argue. The strange part, she said, was that none of it had made them weaker. Knowing exactly how small they'd been, that was the thing that had made them strong. Montego came up the slope then, ducking under branches, holding a flat round of bread baked with cheese and herbs across the top. Still warm. Pizza, Clarice had called it when she'd taught the orcs to make it, a word out of a life none of them would ever ask about. Maya took a wedge and allowed that it wasn't bad. The only real problem, she said, was that the portion was far too much for one person. Clarice took her own slice and ate it sitting cross-legged in the firelight, a worthless girl who could not be killed, presiding over a hilltop of people the world had thrown away, and let herself be content for the length of a meal. The work, after that, never stopped. Clarice pulled the village apart and put it back together with a clearer shape. 32 people remained in Sutton, and she gave each a job that fit. Orcs to the fields, the gentle slow ones to the rebuild, the strongest sent over the hill to break new ground on the demon side, where the land was dangerous and the soil was rich. A new house went up where the burned chief's house had stood, built to orc scale, and she rattled around inside it like a pea in a barn. Word came up quietly from below, without ceremony. The wolf chief and the fox woman had given the last of what they knew, and were gone. Clarice had ordered it done where the child would never see it, and never have to. She did not dwell on it. There were carts to load. 15 days into the rebuild, a tribe came out of the trees asking for help. They were kobolds, small dog-faced beastmen, barely up to her waist. A tribe called the Poro, led by an anxious, earnest little fellow named Iota. Wolves had broken their home. Iota's group was all that had run far enough to live, and he begged her, head low, for shelter. She told him yes, and that he would earn it. Surely there was something his people could do. There was. Within days, the Poro had proven themselves the most useful hands in the valley. Quick, clever, tireless, easy to like. The natural go-betweens of a village that had never learned to live across species lines. They spun thread from plant fiber, found their own dyes in the hills, and set their small, clever fingers to work. The first thing the Poro made for her was clothes. For weeks, Clarice had worn nothing but Unos's enormous cloak, swimming in it, and now she stood in a simple woven tunic and wrap dyed the soft brown of bark. Her own size, at last, fitted to her slight frame. She turned her arm over and admitted she'd half forgotten what she looked like as a person and not a tent. Serena gave up the rest. The fox spirit owed her a debt now. She had failed to keep Karina out of the wolves' hands, and they both knew it. So when Clarice asked, Serena told her where a deep seam of rock salt lay buried in the hills. That was the last piece. With salt, the village could cure meat for the cold. The smokehouses went up, the loggers went out, and the racks filled with fish and game laid down against winter. Clarice walked the rows of drying meat and let herself feel, for one breath, that she was ahead of the season. She wasn't fool enough to believe it would last. Both good and bad were coming, she told the girls. She couldn't see all of it, no one could, and there was no use grinding herself down trying. You met the future one step at a time, and you kept your salt dry. 7 days later, the situation moved. The first to come was a merchant, and she came smiling. Her name was Leaf, a cat beastman with dark red hair and brown ears, well-dressed, sharp behind the easy manner, and she nearly dropped her sample case when the village chief's proxy turned out to be a human girl. Clarice let her recover, introduced herself, and got down to it. Leaf wanted wheat. Everyone out here wanted wheat. The beastman lands ran on barter, no coin anywhere, and wheat was as close to money as it got. Clarice said no, the food stayed. She had refugees to feed and more coming, and she would not sell the one thing that kept them alive. But she'd trade other things. Information, for one, and they spent a pleasant hour swapping it. Clarice walking away with cloth and a sack of iron nails for a handful of harmless news. She fed Leaf a hot meal, pressed dried bread on her for the road, and sent her off delighted. Then she watched her go and frowned. Because Leaf had been a touch too careful. She'd traded freely and laughed easily, and never once asked the question any normal merchant would ask first, which was what a human girl was doing alive in the middle of beastman country. A person who didn't ask the obvious question usually already knew the answer. Clarice filed her away. Friend, maybe, or a thread running back to something larger, waiting to be pulled. She didn't have long to wonder. Jade came at a jog to tell her the next visitor had arrived, and this one had brought 20 wagons. The magistrate was a raccoon beastman, and he came to Sutton the way men like him always came. Loud, entitled, certain the rules bent around his belly. He'd brought 20 wagons and 40 horses to haul away more wheat than the village owed, and he announced it like a man doing them a favor. Behind the wagons, harnessed to the work like animals, were 20 dog beastmen, bonded labor, kept on short rope, told to load and haul and keep their eyes down. He barely looked at them. To him, they weren't people. They were tools with the cost already paid. Clarice met him in the road and asked one quiet question after another, the way she'd asked Montego about the soldiers, where the village's wheat actually went, whether the king ever saw a single grain of it, how a man on a magistrate's pay came to own 20 wagons. He blustered, he threatened, and then, cornered, certain his size and his office made him untouchable, he as good as bragged it, that the orc's grain had never reached the king at all, that he'd been skimming it for years and blaming the shortfall on the village, letting the king think Sutton was poor and faithless while he grew fat on what they grew. He fed on the weakest people in the kingdom and called it his right. She let him finish. She wanted the whole village to hear him say it. Then she ended him, cleanly and without a show, the way you put down something that has been eating your livestock. One moment, he was the loudest man in the road. The next, he simply wasn't there to be loud anymore. No one wept. The horses didn't even startle. The 20 dog beastmen stood frozen in their harnesses, waiting to find out which kind of master they'd just been handed to. Clarice walked down the line and took the rope off the first of them herself. They weren't property, she told them. Not his, not hers, not anyone's. Their villages had been broken by the king's judgments, and they'd been swept up as spare hands, nameless, owned. That was over. They were free to go, and if they stayed, they'd stay as themselves, with a name of their own, the Hound Tribe, hers to protect, never hers to keep. Their leader stepped forward to answer for them. He was a sleepy-eyed, unhurried sort named Alto, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere with a horse and a patch of shade, and who, it turned out within the hour, got more done with less fuss than anyone she'd met. The raccoon used to scream at him to work harder, Alto said mildly, scratching a horse's nose, but the work was always going to be the same amount, and if it was a fixed amount, he'd just as soon do it the quiet way. Unos said the man was worth 10 shouting overseers. Katerina, off to the side, looked privately furious that the praise had gone to someone else. That night, they held a war council around a table built for giants. The shape of it came clear as they talked. There was a rebel coalition out there, the Beastmen Union, and it had been hammering the loose outer tribes that owed the Lion King only the vaguest loyalty. Every village the Union hit stopped paying the king his tax, and a king short on tax leaned on his magistrates, and a leaned-on magistrate came to a place like Sutton demanding more. The raccoon hadn't been a private rot. He'd been a symptom of a sick thing much larger and much farther up. Clarice asked Unos the only question that mattered. What happened next? He laid out 3 roads. 1. The Beastmen Union sent an army, because a thriving little nation of cast-offs on the border was exactly the kind of thing they couldn't allow. 2. The king's soldiers came, if word of a dead magistrate ever climbed the chain. 3. Nothing happened at all. Of the 3, he counted on the first, and counseled bracing for the worst of them. Then Clarice turned to the 2 girls, and asked what they thought the village should do. Katerina answered first, fierce with the wish to be useful. Prepare for an army. Karina finished it, and keep building the frontier anyway, because the Union's victims would keep arriving, and every one of them was another pair of hands. Not one or the other, both. Iota reported the frontier clearing was going well, and the preserved food kept stacking up. Montego said the fields were widening, though the harvest was still a way off. Alto offered to put the new horses and wagons to work past the far fields, and to throw up stables while he was at it. Clarice looked around a table of orcs and demons and kobolds and freed slaves, all arguing cheerfully about how to defend a home, and wished, just briefly, that she had a few more minds like theirs. Then she told them to start. Several days on, the next tribe arrived, and this one walked in with its chin up. The Taurus were cattle beastmen, 40 of them and 40 cows besides, driven off their own land by the Union. You might have expected refugees to come humble. These came strutting. Their spokesman, a broad-shouldered bull of a man named Sparky, planted himself in the yard and announced that orcs ought to serve the Taurus, not the reverse. They'd let the orcs use their cattle, and in exchange, the orcs could work their fields and feed them. Montego, unbothered, scratched his cheek and asked the obvious thing. Were they refugees who'd run from a beating, or were they the Beastmen Union itself? Sparky took that as an insult and squared up for a fight. Unos stepped in without a word. He was a grandmaster who never needed his full strength, and he didn't use it now. Just a dozen measured open palm strikes, fast as falling rain, until the big man was flat in the dirt begging him to stop and plainly unsure why he was even being hit. Clarice arrived, got the story from the orcs, and surveyed the flattened spokesman with mild interest. She noted out loud that not one of his proud tribe had lifted a finger to help him. Then she went to work on the thing that actually made the tourist dangerous to take in, the strut. She had Sparky get up and apologize, properly, in front of everyone. She made him say, out loud, that he was sorry for swaggering in here, like being the biggest animal in the field made him the smartest. He hesitated, and then, with 40 of his own people watching, he said it, every deflating word, and the whole tribe's bluster popped like a struck bladder. After that, they folded in easily, sheepish and grateful. One more set of hands, and 40 head of cattle. Clarice hadn't crushed them. She'd only let the air out. She wanted members, not corpses. Out on the frontier, Iota had started spending more days than not, because out there, his craft was needed most. The place was going up at a frightening pace. Demons who could drop a tree with one swing, orcs and Taurus breaking ground behind them, Poro turning the raw timber into finished parts, hounds running the carts between the frontier and Sutin and the dwarf's mountain. Iota worked all day and was, for the first time in his life, valued for it. The woman who ran it all was an old demon named Betha, loud, sharp-eyed, tireless, who looked to be in her 20s and was in fact 78. She praised his work and patted his head like he was a clever pup. And then, one evening, she said a quiet thing she hadn't meant to. Her clan had been ordered to die once, a suicide charge against the human country, an honorable death. She'd meant to go, but someone had to stay and look after this lot, so she'd chosen to live and follow Clarice instead. And I love this, she admitted, looking out over the lamplit camp. I do. I love every part of it. Then she frowned, which is exactly why it scares me. Sometimes I look at that girl smiling at all of us, and I wonder if we're being fooled. If that smile's hiding something, I can't tell. And I feel guilty, you know, how fast I'm forgetting the dead now that I'm happy. She laughed at herself, a little ashamed. Where was it exactly, she wondered aloud, that they were all marching toward? Iota didn't have an answer. He and Alto talked it over later, loading the last cart. How strangely well they were treated here. The powerful one, not grabbing everything she could the way powerful ones always did. Neither of them had really chosen this. They'd washed up in it, and both would have been dead without it. Whatever she was, savior or something colder, they were alive, and that had to count. The question hung there, unanswered. Was Clarice a savior or just a very kind sort of user? Nobody on that frontier could see behind the smile, including perhaps her. Far away, in the country that had burned her, the lie was starting to rot its makers. Eckhart had become a hollow man. The young noble who'd once chosen his career over a girl on a pyre now barely spoke, drifting through his family's rooms with the lights low and his eyes lower. The Miller house found its invitations unanswered, and its name spoken at court with a small flinch and a step backward. And the Gloria name was cracking down the middle under a rumor no one could prove and no one could unhear, that they had burned a girl who couldn't die, and that she had walked out of the fire and away. In the markets and the halls, the townsfolk passed it mouth to mouth, leaning close, glancing over their shoulders. Nobody could verify it. That was the poison of it. A thing you cannot prove is a thing you also cannot kill, and every retelling ate a little more of the families that had handed her to the flame. The world had named her worthless and thrown her away. Now it was quietly choking on what it had thrown. For 10 days after the tourists came, everything went right. The carts ran their loops, timber and salt and tools, moving between the frontier and Sutin and the mountain. The settlement thickening into real infrastructure trip by trip. The walls went up, the granary filled. A nation of cast-offs, orcs and demons, kobolds and the hound tribe and the humbled Taurus put down roots deep enough to feel like they might actually hold. Then, on the last morning, with the final wagon load barely through the gate, the lookouts came running. Clarice climbed the new earthworks and looked out past her fields, and there it was, coming over the far rise in a long dark line that did not end where she kept expecting it to. The Beastmen Union, a real army, banners and spears, and the dust of hundreds, marching on the home she had built out of everything the world hadn't wanted. Somewhere far behind that line was a human baron who couldn't tolerate a thriving nation of the discarded on his border. This was his hand, reaching at last. Unos came up beside her, sword at his hip, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the horizon wasn't already saying. Clarice stood very still in her plain brown clothes, a frail girl who could not be killed, and watched the world come to collect. Well, she said, mostly to herself, there's the worst of the three. From the hilltop, the Beastman Union army had stopped looking like a line and started looking like a flood. They came across the low ground below Sutton in their tribes. Wolves out front, lizards in a hard knot behind them, baboons loping at the flanks, a loose mass of kobolds at the rear, dog beastmen strung along the baggage, banners, spears, dust where there should have been mourning quiet. Serena counted without seeming to move her lips. 250, she murmured. Closer to 300, if you count the ones still coming over the rise. Clarice stood at the lip of the hill in her plain brown clothes and did the arithmetic she didn't want to do. 50 wolves, 60 lizards, give or take, a score of baboons, as many kobolds, half a hundred dog beastmen hauling the wagons. It was not a raid. A raid didn't bring banners. They knew where to come, she said. How many of us? What we had? Which road? Someone drew them a map. She already had a name for it. The cat merchant, Leaf, won over and waved off down the road with cloth and nails not 3 weeks back, and never once asking the one question a real merchant always asked. Clarice had filed her away as a thread to pull later. Later had arrived early, wearing armor. There, Serena's eyes had gone narrow and far. Down in the enemy's baggage, behind the wagons, a small, dark red-haired shape sagged between two guards, ears flat, kept upright more than standing. Your merchant. They squeezed her, and then they kept her. So Leaf had talked, willing or not. It hardly mattered now. Clarice let the anger come and go without letting it onto her face. Beside her, Sparky's broad shoulders had gone rigid. The young tourist jabbed a shaking finger at the knot of lizards. It's them, big bro. The ones that hit our village. Those lizard bastards. They're not raiders. They're killers. This is bad. Iota had gone very still at the sight of the wolves. And those broke mine, the little kobold said quietly. The kobolds at the back, though, look how they're herded. I don't think they came on purpose. I think they were made to. Clarice took the measure of her own side without turning her head. Every demon she had was here or close. Unos at her shoulder, Maya and Jade and the rest spread along the earthworks. Half the orcs were already forward, most of the Poro waiting where she'd set them, the Hound tribe still moving the loops with the horses. Duval was off at the Rock Mountain, as Duval always was when it would have been convenient to have a dwarf. A handful of Taurus on the hill, 30-odd of hers against 300 of theirs. Montego shifted his 3 meters of bulk and would not look at the army. Miss Clarice, his voice was small for a thing that size. We've made up our minds. We have. Only, we made all this. The fields, the walls, the houses. And now I look down there and think about losing it, and my hands won't stop shaking, he swallowed. Could you say something? To everyone? So that was the difference, Clarice thought. The orcs had never been afraid of dying. They'd become afraid of losing, which meant they finally had something to lose. She could work with a fear like that. She turned so the ones along the wall could hear, and she did not raise her voice, because a raised voice sounds like someone who isn't sure. Everything down there came up this road to take what's behind you, she said. Your roofs, your grain, the first thing in any of your lives that was actually yours. And if you don't want to be robbed, there's exactly one thing to do. And the good part is, you've already done it. You built the walls, you filled the granary, you sharpened what you had, and you stood where you stand. She let it settle. Preparation, that's the whole secret. There's no clever part after it. We did the work, and all that's left is to swing the fist we made. So stop counting how many they are. Look at what they have to get through to reach you. Down the line, a few backs straightened. Sparky stopped shaking. Somewhere along the wall, Katerina and Karina got the look they got when they decided to be useful or die trying. Montego let out a breath that had been 3 meters of held dread and nodded. Someone behind her, Maya most likely, had already said the sensible thing. Hit them first from the trees before they formed up. Clarice shook her head. No ambush, she said. We talk first. She'd refused the ambush for 2 reasons, and only said one of them aloud. The spoken reason was simple. You didn't earn a home by knifing strangers in the dark. You earned it standing up in daylight, as something that had to be talked to. The other reason was waiting down in the village, a very old granary and a very new idea, and it only worked if the army walked in believing it had already won. Both reasons pointed her the same way, down the slope. Talk first. She'd take 2 with her. Unos, because nothing on that field moved faster. Serena, because nothing on that field could read a room like her. She started down. Clarice, Unos hadn't moved. When she looked back, he had the particular stillness he got before he said a thing he'd been holding. Let me do the talking. She waited. This is ours, he said. Not just yours. Every one of us got swept here on your current, picked up off a road, pulled out of a fire, freed off a wagon, and we followed. Because following you beat dying. But a people that only ever follows one person's pull never becomes a people. It just becomes carried. He glanced down at the army. then back at her. Sooner or later, we have to choose for ourselves. Speak for ourselves. Let it start here. Let me stand in front of them as us, instead of as your shadow. For a moment, Clarice said nothing, because he'd put his finger on the exact thing she'd been too busy to name. She carried everyone. It was easier. It was also a little more each day, turning a nation into luggage. All right, she said. It's yours. Run it however you want. I'll stand behind you and look harmless. A flicker of the old dryness crossed her face. I'm good at that. Serena fell in on her other side, 6 tails low, and looked down at the 300 with something close to amusement. You know this won't end with anyone shaking hands. No, Clarice agreed. But they don't know that yet. That's the part that matters. Astra, strongest blade of his Lizardman clan, had fought in worse causes than this one, and had stopped pretending years ago that the cause was the point. His clan lived at the ragged edge of Beastman country. They paid King Randall no tax, owed him nothing, and hired their spears to whoever could meet the price. A warrior fought for coin and a clean battlefield, not for kings, and not for the Beastman Union's grand talk about toppling the lion. This morning, the coin had bought a march on an orc farming village. Soft, fat, frightened. The kind of work that bored him before it started. Then the gate opened, and 3 people walked out to meet 300, and Astra's boredom died. They weren't running. They weren't even hurrying. A tall demon with a black sword at his hip, an old fox woman with too many tails, and a small blonde human girl who looked like she'd wandered out of somebody's kitchen. All 3 of them ambling across open ground toward an army, as if they were only crossing it to borrow salt. At the head of the line, the wolf commander stiffened. Astra had served under Galen long enough to read the shape of his moods, and the demon's presence had soured this one fast. Galen barked the first question, demanding to know who in the king's name these 3 were, before he'd remembered to ask the questions that actually mattered. The demon answered without hurry. This was the orc village of Sutton, he said, and he spoke for the orcs in everything about to be discussed. Then he turned the question back, flat as a closed door. And who, exactly, were they? Astra watched his commander pick pride over sense. Galen demanded to know what had become of the wolf chief Zamba, who had come this way and then gone silent. The demon's mouth twitched. That mutt, he called him. Just that mutt, and let it hang in the air. Astra saw Galen's hackles rise, saw him choke it down, because the demon's stillness promised a very bad afternoon for whoever moved first. The demon hadn't given his own name. He'd asked for Galen's and offered nothing back. A small, deliberate contempt, the kind a strong man uses to tell a weaker one exactly where he stands. Then the offer. Grain, the demon said. Already harvested, already sacked, already set aside. More than enough to make the long march worth their trouble. And the wolf chief they'd lost, alive, held. A bargaining chip, set on the table as casually as the grain. Take the deal, or take nothing. And if they pushed for more, he'd burn every grain and every roof to ash before he let a single sack be stolen. Astra watched greed do its slow work behind Galan's eyes. A granary full, a captive to ransom, a village too soft to fight. The commander told his troops to move up and keep their guard high, and turned to follow the demon through the gate. Every instinct Astra owned went cold. 3 defenders did not walk out smiling at 300. The grain was real, the captive was real, and that was exactly what made it wrong. Nobody gave away that much unless the giving was the trap. But a soldier who refused a march on a feeling had no clan left to feed. So Astra said nothing, shifted his grip on his spear, and followed the rest in. Inside the walls, the wrongness only got worse. The road was too wide. The buildings were too big. Doorways cut for shoulders 3 meters across. Granaries the size of barns. Everything scaled up and squared off, and orderly, in a way no frightened village had any business being. Astra knew orcs. Long ago they'd been a violent race, until stronger tribes, wolves, lizards, lions, outmuscled them down into the fields, and they'd traded their war for wheat. He'd expected mud and panic. He'd gotten wide, clean roads and a place built to stand for centuries. A creeping cold went over his scales, and he could not have said why. At the meeting ground, the demon stopped and laid the terms down plainly. He'd set aside a fair share for a village this size. Not a kingdom's worth, not enough to feed 1,000 for a year, but reasonable and final. This is the compromise, he said. There's no more talking after it. Load what's offered and leave. Push for more, and you'll watch all of it burn before you carry off 1 grain. Galen didn't like being handled, and let it show. He made his threats about what 300 could do to a village this soft, about how little a demon's warnings weighed with him, but his eyes never once left the granary, and in the end, greed answered for him. He gave the order. Wagons up, load the grain. The baboons and the kobolds broke toward the big weathered granary at the edge of the ground, and the army's discipline loosened the way it always does the moment soldiers smell loot instead of a fight. Astra didn't move toward the granary. He stood in the wide road with his spear and watched the small blonde girl, the one who hadn't said a single word the whole time, and tried to work out why she was the only thing on the field that frightened him. The girl moved. She crossed to the old granary ahead of the commander, a weathered, leaning thing, far older than the new walls, the one building in Sutton that didn't match the rest. She laid her small hand on the door, looked back at Galan over her shoulder, and smiled. Astra saw it from across the ground, and every scale on him went to ice. It was not a frightened girl's smile. For half a breath, it was something old and cold and patient, looking out of a child's face. And then it folded into something sweet and pretty and harmless, a girl holding a door for an honored guest. "Please, this way." Galan went to her. Of course he did. He wanted to count his prize with his own eyes, and a blonde slip of a human was the least of 300 things to fear. He stepped past her into the dark of the granary. The world turned white. The granary did not burn. It came apart. One flat, enormous slam of air that Astra felt in his teeth from clear across the ground. A fist of force punching out through old timber and throwing the doorway and everything near it flat. Not fire. Something faster than fire, born of the fine dust that hangs in any place that has held grain for years, lit in a single breath, all at once. The blast swallowed the doorway. It swallowed the commander. It swallowed the troops who'd crowded up to load, and the sound of it rolled out across the village like a struck drum the size of the sky. And in the same heartbeat, the sky came down. Stone fell, not thrown, rained, bursting overhead and scattering wide across the packed meeting ground where the army stood thickest. Shot flung from the hill they'd marched past without a second look, breaking apart above them and hammering down in a gray hail across the whole exposed mass of the 300. There was nowhere to stand that wasn't under it. The disciplined ranks of a moment ago became a churn of beastmen clawing for a direction that didn't end in falling rock. Astra understood all of it at once. Far too late. The grain, the captive, the three smiling fools. None of it had ever been a surrender. It had been a hand, opened wide and patient, reaching out to draw 300 armed men into the one place where a frail girl's cleverness could land on every one of them together. He looked for the defenders. The demon and the foxwoman were already off the meeting ground, falling back, fast and unhurried at the same time, up the slope toward the hill where the stones were born, and out of the settling gray of it, where nothing had any right to be left standing, a small figure walked. Clarice stepped clear of the dust in her plain brown clothes, fine gray ash sifting off her shoulders, not a mark on her, brushing a fleck of it from her sleeve the way another person might brush off rain. Behind her, the granary was a ruin, and the commander who'd walked into it would not be walking out. Ahead of her, 300 soldiers were learning, in the worst possible way, how badly they'd been counted. She started up the hill after the others, unhurried, and did not look back at the field she'd just turned into a trap. The fist was already swinging. This had only been the knuckles landing. Out on the open ground, the field was already coming apart. Stone was falling out of a clean sky. The ranks were folding into a churn that had no front to it anymore, and the wide blow had landed exactly where she had set it to land. That was the part the eye could see. That had only ever been the knuckles. Clarice had walked away from it. She had taken the one thing worth taking, the big wolf beastman at the head of the whole march, the leader the rest looked to, and she had walked him quietly to the one building still standing at the edge of the noise. The old granary, weathered gray timber, a door built thick enough to keep out a winter, and a frame that read, "To a man who did not know better," like the safest place on a field that had stopped being safe. She set both hands flat against the door and pushed. Nothing. She put her shoulder into it the way a girl of 18 with no muscle to speak of puts her shoulder into anything, which was to say it did not move a finger's width, and she stepped back and blew a strand of blonde hair out of her face. "Help me get this open, would you?" She said it the way you would ask a stranger to reach a high shelf, light, a little helpless, faintly embarrassed at her own weakness. The wolf leader looked down at her. Whatever was crossing behind his eyes, it was suspicion, but it was the lazy kind, the suspicion of a strong man who has never once in his life needed to be afraid of something small. He grumbled something about the grain being his anyway. He set one broad hand against the timber and shoved, and the heavy door groaned back on its track as if it weighed nothing. He had opened it himself. That was the part she had wanted, not the door, the choosing. The strongest creature on the field had reached out with his own hand and unsealed the room she meant to bury him in, because a frail girl asking for help reads as no kind of threat at all. It was the same mistake the whole world had made about her, made one last time. On the last day, it would matter. "Thank you," Clarice said sweetly, and stepped inside ahead of him. The inside was a long, narrow dark. One blade of daylight came in through the open door and gave up a few steps past the threshold, and after that, it was all shapes. The close-stacked sacks along the walls, the heavy beams overhead, the dry-held breath of a place that had stored 100 harvests. The wolf leader pushed past her into it. He went deep, the way a big, confident animal goes deep into a small space, expecting to find what he came for. He found stacks of bagged flour and nothing else. No broadclan, no allies waiting. He turned a slow circle in the dark, and his patience curdled, and he asked her, flat and getting flatter, where the broadclan was. Clarice had stayed near the door. She let the question hang for a moment in the dry air. "They're not coming," she said. The sweetness had gone out of her voice between one breath and the next, the way a light goes out. Not slowly, not for effect, just off. "Did you really think we'd keep a pack of losers alive after they wouldn't bend? We ended every one of them, burned what would burn, buried the rest. The clan you came all this way to meet has been in the ground for days." She watched the words land. In the dark, she could not see his face change, but she could hear it. The shift in his breathing, the half second where a slow mind catches up to a fast truth and finds it does not like the shape of it. "This was never a war," she went on. Conversational now, almost kind. "A war is two sides who both get a say. You walked 300 people onto ground you never bothered to look at because nobody who ever lost to you was worth scouting. That was the whole of your plan. Walk in and take." His confusion was turning, fast, towards something with teeth in it. He started back toward her, toward the blade of light and the small shape standing in it. Above his head, threaded through the beams where no one looks in the dark, ran a thin cord. Iota had rigged it, every knot of it. The little kobold's clever hands working timber and twine for a week, tying each flour sack along the ceiling to a single pull. Clarice reached up, found the cord by feel, and closed her fist around it. "You should have looked at the ground," she said. She pulled. The sacks tore open all at once. A week of fine milled flour came down out of the beams in a single sheet, and the dry air drank it. And in the space of a breath, the inside of the granary stopped being a room full of grain and became a room full of cloud. A dense, choking, weightless white, packed so thick it swallowed the door, swallowed the wolf leader's shape, swallowed the light. Powder this fine, this dry, this evenly hung in the air, is not flour anymore. It is the most patient kind of fuel there is, and it is only waiting for one spark to learn what it has become. It learned. There was no flame to watch climb. There was no fire that walked. There was a single point of ignition somewhere in the white, and then the entire volume of the air went at once. All of it, everywhere, in the same instant, and the breath of the granary turned to a fist of pressure that had nowhere to go. The blast did not lick at the walls. It threw them. The heavy timber that had kept out 100 winters came off its frame as if the building had decided altogether to stop existing, and a flat slam of white light punched out through the open door and the seams and the roof at the same moment, so that for half a heartbeat, the old granary was lit from the inside like a struck match the size of a house. The sound was not a crack. It was a single enormous concussion that you felt in the teeth and the chest before the ears caught up. A struck drum blow that flattened the far thud of the falling stone and the churn of the army and every other noise on the field into nothing, into a clean, ringing silence pressed in on all sides. Where the wolf leader had been, there was light, and then there was the silence after the light, and the leader who had walked 300 onto unscouted ground did not walk out of the room he had opened with his own hand. The granary that had held him came down into a low, broken heap of gray timber and settling dust, the whole shape of it gone, as if a hill had quietly sat down where a building used to stand. The blast did not stop at the walls it had thrown. The pressure rolled out from the wreck in a single flat wave, a wall of moving air you could see coming by the dust it carried, and it crossed the open ground between the granary and the massed army, and reached the nearest ranks before the sound did. Soldiers at the edge of the meeting ground, who had heard the slam and turned toward it, were knocked flat where they stood, not by stone, not by any weapon they could name, but by the air itself shoving them off their feet. The dust of the leveled building lifted in a brown column and spread, sinking over the whole field like a lid coming down, and the soldiers under it lost the sun and the sky, and one another in the same breath. A frail girl's pull on a string in a dark room had reached out and touched 300 armed beastmen standing 100 steps away, and Clarice was in the middle of it. She had not stood at a safe distance and pulled a string. She had pulled it from inside the cloud, near the only door, because the cord had to be reached by feel in the dark, and there was no one else in the world who could stand at the center of a blast like that and still be standing afterward. The pressure took her the way it took the walls. It threw her down and through and under, and somewhere in the white and the slam, it killed her. Fast, total, no time even to be surprised by it. The body simply switched off between one instant and the next. It was not her first death. It was, by a long way, the loudest. And in the very same minutes, the rest of the fist came down. Up on the hill behind Sutton, the catapult had been waiting all along. Duvel the dwarf had forged its iron parts out of the same rocky mountain he mined. The Poro kobolds had fitted them together. The Taurus and the Hound tribes crewed the arm. It had been ranged on the meeting ground before the army ever marched past it. Sighted, set, patient, and when the granary went, it answered. It did not throw a single stone. It threw stone by the sackful. Bark bags packed with rock from Duvel's mountain that came up off the arm in a high arc, climbed, broke open at the top of their climb, and let go. Each bag became a falling sky. The rock spread as it dropped, 100 stones from one throw fanning out over the massed ground. And then another sack was already up and breaking, and another, the hill working the arm as fast as the crews could load it. To the 300 packed onto that ground, it must have looked like the air itself had turned against them. They had crowded in to load grain onto wagons, ranks gone loose and greedy, and thinking themselves the winners. And there was no formation left to break, and nowhere that was not under the falling shot. The army that had come over the rise as an organized line, wolves at the front, the hard knot of lizardmen, baboons on the flanks, the herded kobolds at the rear, came apart into a churn of bodies, all trying to run in directions that every one of them ended in more rock coming down. The dust they kicked up met the dust off the granary, and the brown haze closed over the whole field until you could not have counted them if you tried. Then the arm went still, because there was nothing left to range on. The stones stopped climbing. The brown haze hung and began, slowly, to thin. And out of the settling came a silence. The second silence of that midday, wider than the first, over a meeting ground that a few minutes before had held 300 soldiers of the world that threw her away, and now held a flat gray stillness and the slow drift of dust coming down. 300 armed beastmen, a frame 6 feet of slight, frail, talentless girl. The whole of the difference between them had been one thing, and it was not strength. It was a mind that remembered another world, and a week of quiet work, and a question nobody on that field had thought to ask about the ground under their own feet. In the heap of the broken granary, under the timber and the settling gray, Clarice came back. It came the way it always came now. No gasp, no lurch, just the switch flipping the other way and the world arriving again. Dust in her mouth and her ears still ringing from a sound her body had not technically been alive to finish hearing. She lay still a moment and took stock. Whole, of course whole. The blast had burned away everything that could burn, which by now she knew to expect. And so she stayed low in the ash and the wreckage, with the gray sifting down over her shoulders, and did not stand up, because she was not in the habit of standing up before her clothes arrived. Her people had learned to keep a set ready and to run when the noise stopped. That was simply how the deaths went. On the days there were deaths. She heard the running before she saw anyone. Light, fast feet coming hard across the broken ground. Katerina came over the timber at a sprint. A bundle of cloth clutched to her chest, purple skin gray with the drifting dust, eyes huge. Maya was astride behind her, spear in one fist, moving fast but scanning the wreck as she came, the way a careful fighter cannot help moving. Katerina dropped to her knees in the ash and put the bundle into Clarice's hands and turned her back in the same motion, planting herself between Clarice and the open field, like a small furious wall. And Maya did the same on the other side without being asked. Between the two of them, the moment was covered before it was a moment at all. "You really," Maya said over her shoulder, eyes still on the field, "are a monster of a woman. The numbers looked rough even for us. I counted them 3 times on the way down and made it worse every time." She let out a breath. "And now there's barely a handful of them left standing." Clarice pulled the clean clothes on under the cover they made of themselves, brisk, unbothered, brushing a slick of ash off her arm as she went. "It worked better than I'd hoped, honestly. I'd never actually set one off before. You only get the one chance to find out if you've remembered it right." Katerina's head whipped around. You didn't know if it would? I had a strong feeling." Clarice got her feet under her and stood, dressed now, blonde hair gone gray-white with dust, fair skin smudged to the same colorless gray, and entirely intact beneath it. She rolled one shoulder as if working out a crick from a nap. Strong feelings are most of strategy. Don't tell Unos I said that. She came out of the wreck and stood at the edge of the field and looked at what she had made of it. It was very quiet. Across the broken meeting ground, the dust was coming down like the end of a snow, and under it, the 300 were ascatter, some down and still, some sitting where they had stopped running with their weapons fallen out of their hands. A thin handful at the far edge, still up and still swinging at the demons closing on them. The last of a fight that had already been decided before any of them understood it had started. It was not a battlefield the way the songs draw one. It was a field where an answer had already been written, and now someone only had to walk through and read it out. Beside her, Katerina was shaking, not with fear, with something hotter than that. She looked at the ones sitting in the dust with their hands open, the ones who had come to take the place down, and now sat waiting to be told whether they would live, and her young face twisted with disgust. "They bared their fangs at you, Lady Clarice," she said, low and furious. "They came all this way to take what's ours, to put us back under a harness. And the instant it turns on them, they sit down in the dirt and wait to be spared?" Clarice reached over without looking and flicked her once on the forehead, a light snap of one finger. Katerina flinched and put a hand to the spot. "Why? Because a lot of them never wanted to be here." Clarice nodded at the rear of the field, where a knot of small, ragged shapes sat pressed together. Kobolds, herded along at the back of someone else's army, with someone else's spears at their backs. Half that march was pressed into it. They were given a choice between this and worse, and they picked the one that was farther from the people they love. "I've been the thing somebody decided was disposable. I'm not in a hurry to make more of them." She paused, and the corner of her mouth moved. "Save the disgust for the ones who came hungry. There'll be enough of those to go around." She turned to Maya. "Bring the Taurus and the Hound down off the hill. The fighting's over up there. They can put the arm to rest. The ones still swinging at the far edge, end it cleanly. It's a mercy at this point. Everyone who's stopped, who's sitting, who's done, those you treat. Water, what wounds you can bind, somewhere out of the sun. Sort the pressed ones from the willing while you're at it. I'll want to talk to them later." Maya looked at her for a long, flat moment. "You're shoving the ugly work onto me again, aren't you? You're good at it. That is not the compliment you think it is." But she was already turning, spear shifting to her shoulder, starting up the slope to fetch the tribes. "If you don't like the job," Clarice called after her, mild, "hand it to someone else." "There is no one else," Maya said, without turning around, "who'll do it and still be able to sleep. That's the whole problem with you." And she went up the hill. Clarice stood alone at the edge of it then, for a moment, and let herself feel for the thing she was supposed to be feeling. She went looking for the hatred. It would have been reasonable to find some. The world had sent these 300 to wipe out the one home she had built out of everything it had discarded. Her, the demons, the kobolds, the orcs, every thrown away thing that had finally found a wall to stand behind. And she had just answered it, and answering it should have felt like something. It didn't. That was the strange part she would not say out loud. There was no heat in her at all looking at the broken field. No triumph worth the name, only a flat and faintly tired clarity. The way you feel after a long sum has finally come out even. They had not been worthy of hating. They had simply been in the way, and now they were not. The whole thing had turned, in the end, on one stupid small thing. Nobody had thought the ground under a worthless girl was worth looking at. It was the same mistake, over and over, all the way down. And under that, quiet. The old ones stirred, the way they always did when she stood still long enough. A family that had decided, without a word to her, that a daughter had never really been theirs. A man who had called off an engagement the moment a better match walked by, and let the fire be lit rather than say so to her face. Far away, in another country, those people were still going about their days. She filed the field away the way she filed everything she did not let herself feel yet, and she did not look at the wreck of the granary behind her. The army was shattered, the home still stood, and the talentless girl they had all agreed to throw away was the only one left standing at the center of it. Ash sifting off her shoulders, feeling no hatred at all, only the clean cold weight of a thing decided. What came next was not a battle. There was nothing left to fight. What came next was the part where the people who had won this together finally turned and looked at each other across a quiet field, and somebody said out loud, at last, what they were going to be. But that was a word for another day, and the dust had not finished falling on this one. The lizardman came in low and fast, and Unos met him. Steel rang off the long black sword and skidded away. The warrior was strong, stronger than anything Unos had crossed all that long day, and he fought clean. No wasted motion, no taunts. Just the spear, working patiently for an opening with the calm of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Astra. Somewhere in the noise, the name had come down the broken ranks to him, the strongest of the lizardmen, and he fought like it. His father's voice came up out of him the way it always did when blades were out. Die with pride. Janus had said it like it was one of the laws that held the world together, and the whole of the old clan had believed him, and the whole of the old clan had marched south behind that law and not come back. Unos had not gone with them. He had chosen to live instead. He had spent a long time after that being ashamed of the choice, carrying it around like a stone he could not set down. He was not ashamed of it now. He had watched a frail human girl walk 300 armed beastmen onto ground they had never once thought to look at and break the whole of them with nothing but her mind. And he had stood at the center of that ruin and felt, for the first time since his clan left him behind, that the choice to go on living had not been the small and shameful thing he had spent a year believing it was. The lizardman's tail swept, not at him, but under him, hooking for his weight and shifting his own stance in the same motion. So the spear came at an angle a man with 2 legs and no tail could never have made. It was good. It very nearly worked. Unos turned the spearhead aside on the flat of the black sword, stepped inside the reach, and put the warrior down into the churned dirt, with one driving shove of his shoulder and a boot planted on the spear haft. Then it was quiet, the two of them breathing, the spear pinned under his foot. Astra did not thrash. He looked up at the demon standing over him, and something behind the scaled face simply settled, the way a balance settles once the weight on it is finally known. I cannot win this. Flat, unbothered, a man reading a line off a measuring rod. There is no meaning in spending my life against someone I cannot beat. Unos said nothing. He lifted his boot off the haft. The lizardman rose to one knee and stayed there, turning the spear over and setting its point in the earth. By his people's law, he said, a beaten warrior had 2 roads and only 2, and no third was ever offered. Die or serve the one who beat him. He had no intention of dying for a war that was already lost before he woke that morning. So use me, Astra said, or end me. That is the whole of my law, and I will hold to it either way. Unos looked at him a long moment. Then he reached down and offered his open hand, the plain demon hand of a man his own clan had called too soft to be worth taking with them. We don't end the ones who've stopped fighting, he said. Get up. The wreckage of the granary moved. It had no business moving. The blast that morning had folded the whole building down into a low heap of broken beam and gray powder, and nothing in it had so much as shifted since. But at the ragged outer rim of the pile, the timber heaved, and then heaved again, and the commander dragged himself up out of it. Galen, the wolf beastman who had marched 300 troops here to swallow the village whole, and who had been close enough to the granary when it went to be flung down and half buried at the edge of the blast, and not, it turned out, finished by it. He came up out of the rubble on all 4s, and then he stopped being something Unos had a clean word for. The change took him fast. Fur thickened and ran out across him, the frame stretching and swelling past any natural size, bone lengthening with a sound like green wood bending, the wolf shape bloating into a hulking thing twice the mass of the man who had begun it. The scrapes the rubble had given him knitted shut as the body remade itself around them. Unos had heard the wolf tribes could do this, trade every scrap of fine control for raw size, and burn through their own magic like dry grass to buy it. He had never watched it happen an arm's length away. The beast fixed on him and charged. Astra. Unos did not take his eyes off the thing coming. The leg, the lizardman was already moving. He took the charge from the side, low and certain, and his spear came down once. The rush folded in the middle of its own stride, one leg gone out from under all that borrowed weight, and the great shape crashed into the dirt a man's length short of Unos and lay there heaving. It tried to rise. It got halfway up, dragging, and snarled at the two of them in a voice like grinding stone, raging about the anti-lion union and the throne it had been sent to seize, about lizardmen with no honor and cast-offs with no right to stand on a field at all, demanding over and over what kind of creatures could possibly have cost it a war it had already counted as won. Astra did not answer a word of it. He glanced up at Unos instead. The other one, Unos said. The spear came down a second time, and the beast came all the way down and stayed. Then it began to shrink. The borrowed size bled out of it breath by breath, the bulk sagging, the thickened fur thinning back, the magic that had fed all of it running dry with nothing left to burn, until what lay in the rubble was a wolf beastman again, and nothing more, spent and shrunk back to the ordinary size of the proud commander who had started the day so sure this would be easy. Unos turned from the wreck and looked out over the field his people had won, and it was not what he had ever imagined a won field would look like. The army was finished, 300 of them, scattered and down and sitting in the dust with their hands hanging open. But his own people were not standing over them in triumph. They were kneeling down among them. The orcs of Sutin, gentle Montego at the head of them, men who could have crushed a skull in either hand, were easing groaning wolf soldiers flat onto their backs and pressing folded cloth to whatever was bleeding. Iota and his kobolds went down the rows no taller than the fallen men's shoulders, sorting with quiet care the ones who had been pressed into this march from the ones who had come for the loot. Alto's hound tribe led horses through the haze, hauling broken timber off the conscripts the blast had pinned. A demon of the old clan crouched and held a waterskin to the mouth of a baboon soldier who an hour before had been trying his hardest to kill him. Maya moved through the middle of it with her spear still in her fist, passing along the quiet orders Clarice had handed her. Treat the ones who had stopped, end nothing that had surrendered, sort the willing from the dragged. Off at the edge, even the proud cattle folk had set down their swagger and were carrying water, and Serena stood with her 6 tails furled, watching the whole strange mercy of it with an expression that was trying very hard to be dry and not quite managing. Nobody was cheering. They were simply, patiently, gathering up even the people who had come to wipe them off the earth. Uno stood in the center of it and felt something move in his chest that he did not yet have a name for. His clan had died to keep its pride clean and unbent. These people had no pride left to keep. The world had stripped it off every one of them years ago. The orcs bred too gentle to fight. The demons their own nation had cast out to die. The foxes and the kobolds, and the humbled herd of cattle folk. The dwarf who had refused to be a slave. The fox child abandoned twice over. The girl who had been burned alive by her own blood. Not one of them had a scrap of the old pride his father had marched into the ground for. And here they were, on a field they had just defended together, kneeling to gather up their enemies. He thought, for the first time in his life, that his father might have had the whole thing exactly backward. Unos, Clarice's voice coming across the field. She picked her way toward him through the settling dust, gray from her blonde hair to her boots, that dry, small smile already in place. It looked, she told him, like he was finished over here too, and he could thank her lovely strategy and his own fists for that, in roughly that order, and he was allowed to be twice as proud as she was. He did not answer right away. He was looking past her at all of them, drifting in now that the work was slowing, drawn toward the center the way people are drawn toward a moment they can feel coming before anyone has named it. The orcs, the demons of the broken clan, Serena with her tails and her sharp fox eyes, the kobolds, the hound tribe, the cattle folk, Katerina, fierce and young, already crying without knowing it, the fox child with both hands wrapped in Katerina's sleeve, and Astra, the enemy of 10 minutes ago, standing a little apart, watching, included by nothing in the world except the plain fact that no one had told him to leave. Every last one of them thrown away by somebody, exiled, enslaved, refused, sold off, set on fire. The world had looked hard at each of them and ruled that they were worth nothing, and the world had been wrong about every single one. And here, they all stood on a field they had just bled to hold with no name in all the world to call themselves by. Unos found that he was no longer the grave, careful man who weighed each word before he would spend it. Something had come loose in him, light and warm and wholly new, and he let it carry his voice up so the whole field could hear. "My name," he said, "is Unos Glorias." The murmuring stopped. Not Unifelisa, not anymore. That clan died holding on to its pride, and on the way to dying it left me behind, because it decided I was too weak to be worth taking along. He turned slowly, face to face to face. "I am done being the thing somebody else decided I was, and so is every one of you." He let it sit on the silence. Then he gave them the rest, and his voice carried it the way a struck bell carries. "The Lion King, the Anti-Lion Union. It makes no difference to me which of them comes. We do not answer to either. We do not answer to anyone who looked at us once and threw us away like something spoiled." A breath, and then it opened all the way, unafraid and full of joy. "We are not the ones who reach up and seize glory off the people standing above us. We were never standing under anyone. We have nothing to reach for and no one to bow to. We are glory. We are the clan of glory. For one heartbeat, nothing happened at all. Then the field came apart with it. The orcs roared at first, 3 meters of gentle giant suddenly bellowing the word straight up at the sky. The demons of the old clan caught it and threw it back. Katarina was screaming it with both fists in the air and tears running freely down her face, and the fox child beside her was mouthing it over and over like something holy. And the kobolds chirped it, and the hound tribe barked it, and the humbled cattle folk stamped it down into the ground until the dust jumped. Glory, glory, the name they had never once in their lives been allowed to have rolled out across the broken field and came back to them doubled. Serena had a hand pressed flat to her mouth, and her sharp, dry eyes had gone bright and were not dry at all. And the word landed differently on each of them, because each of them had been thrown away in a different way. For the orcs of Sutton, it was the first time in living memory a name had been given to them instead of taken off them. For the demons of the old clan, it was a clan again, the one thing their own nation had marched them out to die without. The fox child, who had been abandoned twice over by the very people who made her, had a family now, with a word stamped across it that nobody could quietly drop her out of. The hound tribe, unharnessed from the magistrates' wagons only days before, were shouting a name of their very own for the first time in any of their lives. Even the cattle folk, who had strutted in here a season ago, looking down their horns at everyone, were stamping the word into the ground like men who had finally found something worth being loud about. Serena, whose whole tribe the Lion King had wiped clean off the world, stood in the noise and let it pour over the empty place where her people used to be. Astra did not shout. His kind did not seem to keep shouting in them for moments like this one, but after a while, he reversed the spear in his scaled hands and set its point down in the dirt at his feet. The same plain gesture he had made kneeling in the dust to Unos, and he stood there at the ragged edge of a family he had marched in that morning to wipe out, counted among the discarded now by the only right his law had ever taught him. A beaten warrior served the one who beat him. He had not once expected the serving to come with a name on it. Unos stood in the middle of the sound he had made and felt the new name turn and look back at him and grin. Off in the rubble, the spent commander heard it too. He lay where the failed change had dropped him, shrunk back down to himself, and through all the cheering he hauled his head up and stared, unable to make any of it fit. So small a band, so ragged a collection of nothing, orcs and demons and vermin tribes, and a slip of a human girl. This was the thing that had swallowed a 300-strong Union force whole in a single morning. This was the thing that meant to set itself between the Lion King and the throne. He demanded of the empty air, again and again, what kind of people these even were. Nobody bothered to answer him. They were all of them too busy being the answer. Clarice had stopped walking. She stood a little back from the roaring center of it with the dust going gold around her, and she watched her right hand stand in the middle of a field, shouting a name she had never thought to give them. And for once, the dry, quick thing she always kept ready simply did not arrive. She had sworn in the fire that she would never do this again. She remembered the exact shape of the vow, the way you remember the shape of a scar by feel. Owe nothing. Care for no one whose judgment could ever be turned against her like a knife. She had stood inside her own flames with 200 people gathered to watch her burn for the crime of being worthless. And not one of them, not her father, not the boy she had been promised to, not a single soul who was supposed to love her, had stood up out of that crowd. So she had decided, very calmly, with the logs blackening around her, that the answer was simple. Never again hand anyone that much power over her. Stay light, stay untouchable, build a wall and live behind it, and feel nothing at all when the world came to test it, because there would be nothing behind that wall worth the losing. The cheering pressed against the wall now from every side. Here was the whole catalog of everything she had been afraid of, laid out on a field in the noon light. A fierce girl crying her name into the sky. A child who looked at her the way other people look at sunrise. A grave demon who had stepped into her current a year ago and never once asked for anything back, who had just given all of them a name and looked to her before he believed it was real. An old fox who pretended not to care and was failing at the pretending exactly as badly as she was. Every one of them a fresh way to be hurt. Every one of them already, somehow, without her ever agreeing to it, hers. The wall did not so much fall as quietly stop mattering. She had spent a year proving to herself that she could not die, and standing here in the gold dust, she finally understood that the thing she had actually been afraid of had never once been dying. It was this, being claimed, being somebody's. And she had walked the whole long width of a continent of monsters straight into the single thing she had sworn off in the fire, and she did not, it turned out, want to leave it. None of that reached her face. It never did. Katerina barreled into her side, still shouting the name, and Clarice let herself be hit and put a hand down on the girl's black hair and did not take it back. The fox child came next, wordless as ever, pressing in tight against her other side, and then there were simply too many of them to keep count of, the whole family folding in around her the way water closes over a dropped stone, and Clarice stood there in the middle of all of it and let every last one of them have her. When Unos finally looked over at her, gone half sheepish now that the words were all the way out of him, she had the dry smile back where it belonged, but there was something underneath it that had not been there in the fire. Unos Glorias, she said, trying the weight of it. It's a good name, a bit grand. He started to say he was sorry for not asking her first. No, the word came out warmer than she had meant to let it. No, leave it exactly where it is. She looked out over all of them, the discarded, the thrown away, the whole gathered crowd of everything the world had been so certain was worth nothing, wearing a name now, on a field they had kept with their own hands. You named us about right. The world that had burned her was still out there somewhere past the dust, and it had not yet heard one single word of what its army had become on this ground. That reckoning would keep. It would have its day, and the day was not this one. But here, in the noon light on the field they had held, the worthless girl who was never once worth defending stood in the middle of a family that had gone and chosen her, and let them, and smiled. And the old wound, after a year of refusing to, finally stopped its bleeding and began, quietly, to be a scar. The sling stones came out of the square, one cartload at a time. They had buried it ankle deep when the barrage fell, 350 of the enemy's stones and a great many more. And now broad pink-handed orcs were prying them loose and stacking them by the well to be thrown back at someone else another day. Clarice watched a kobold balance 2 of them on his head for the fun of it and decided not to stop him. The dead had been handled first, before any of this. She had given the work to Maya and not gone to see it herself. A field cleared, a line drawn under it, the matter closed. Over a year of being unable to die, she had learned that there were things you arranged and then did not stand around looking at. What was left was the living, and the living had changed shape overnight. Astra's lizardmen had stayed, 5 of them, scaled and unreadable. Their leader, the one Unos had put down in the duel and then offered a hand to. He had come to Unos that morning to make it plain, in his halting blunt way, that his people had joined Glory, that they were not the same as Clarice's Glory and never would be, but that Glory liked Clarice, and he understood that much, and that was enough. The girl was weak, he said, and somehow also strong, surely stronger than any of them, and so he respected her. Then he had gone down to the river to work, and where Astra went, his kin went. The horned baboons who had been driven into the enemy's ranks laid down their spears the moment the ranks broke. They held no grudge that anyone could find. They had been forced into that war and were glad to be out of it. They ran the high trees at the forest edge as if the branches were a road. A clutch of small dog-faced kobolds from a broken tribe had come in behind the Poro, grieving and half hollow, and gone straight to work with their clever hands, because work was easier than sitting still. The other survivors, the ones who would not stay, Clarice let go. Some of them would carry word of this place back to people who wished it ill. She knew that and freed them anyway. You could not build a thing worth keeping by keeping people in it against their will. She had decided that a long time ago, in a different fire. It was not, she would admit, a handsome crowd. The lizardmen had faces a mother would struggle with, and the baboons were worse. But she already had 3-meter orcs and purple-skinned demons and a 6-tailed fox who could set a hillside alight with a look. And one more strange face in that company changed precisely nothing. They were hers now. That was the whole of it. There was one face she had not folded in, and it was the prettiest of the lot. Leaf lay on a pallet at the back of the store hut they had turned into an infirmary. A cat beastman merchant with dark red hair and brown ears flattened against the bandages, 2 ribs strapped and 1 leg splinted straight. She had been found wounded in the enemy's baggage, where a captive ought to be. She smiled up at the 2 of them as though they had come to buy cloth. Unos asked her, flatly, exactly how Galan's people had taken her. Nothing more than that. He asked it the way he asked everything now, plain and patient, and then went quiet and let his cold gaze do the rest of the work. Leaf told it easily. She had only been doing her rounds, she said, spreading word of the settlement the way a merchant did, talking a place up so trade would follow, and the wolves had caught her on the road and dragged her along, and this was what had come of it. She lifted the splinted leg an inch off the pallet by way of evidence and let it drop. A working girl in the wrong place at the wrong hour. It was a good story. Clarice let it finish all the way. Then she said, pleasantly, that she only wondered how Rex Ash would take the news. Leaf's eyes went round. It lasted half a breath, the ears coming up, the easy smile catching at one corner, and then the merchant's face slid back down over all of it, smooth as a drawn shade. But half a breath was a confession, and all three of them in that hut knew it. Clarice had not known. She had guessed, off a name a captured foxwoman had let slip weeks ago, and a feeling about a merchant who asked no prying questions because she already had her answers. She had said the name the way you say a thing you are entirely certain of, and the certainty had done the work the knowledge could not. So, Leaf was the leopard's, Rexash, the Lion King's own clever aide, the one who had once told a foxwoman exactly where to find Serena, had a merchant walking this frontier, counting Clarice's people and her fields and her strange unburnable self, and sending all of it quietly home. She crouched beside the pallet. Leaf could keep her secret if she liked, she told her, and meant it. It was truly no trouble. It was only that secrets had a way of costing the keeper her welcome, and a guest who lost her welcome out here, 20 days from anywhere, might find the problem had stopped being only hers. She said it kindly. She was smiling the whole time. Leaf laughed, weak and rueful, and asked if it was no good after all. Behind Clarice, Unos had not moved, and his eyes had not warmed by a single degree. Two hands then, reaching toward the thing she had made. The human one, Baron Spade, the lordling whose lands ran up against the frontier, who had paid for the beast coalition that had just died in her square. And now the inside one, Rexash, in the king's own court, watching her through a cat's eyes. The world that had thrown all these people away was not finished with them. It had only gotten organized. The days that followed were the best she could remember having. It surprised her how much she liked them. She had told herself 100 times that she preferred a fight to a field, a clean problem with a single answer, and it turned out she had been lying to herself the whole while. What she liked was this: the morning over the frontier with the work already loud, and herself carried out to look at it on the shoulder of a 3-meter orc because her own legs were far too short and slow to make the rounds before noon. Montego walked her along the bank, one enormous careful hand held ready at her back in case she leaned too far. Below them, the river ran 10 meters across and fast, the barrier that had hemmed Sutton in for years, and in it, the lizardmen moved as if the current were a thing they owned, hauling a net-strung bank to bank, opening the far country that no orc had ever crossed. The baboons ran the canopy above the far trees, scouting ground no one else could reach. At the looms under the eaves, the kobolds worked, the poro quick and chattering, the broken shamal ones quiet beside them and learning the work, their grief going somewhere into their hands. The ones who had come in certain that no place in the world would ever have them had found, to their own surprise, that one would, and that they wanted it. A demon and a dwarf argued happily over a forge. The fields ran on past where she could see the end of them. She had built that. The thought arrived plainly, without much fuss, the way her thoughts always did. Montego said, out of nowhere, that he was glad. Glad of what? She asked him. That I left it to you. He said it slowly, the way he said everything. His tusked face turned out at the water. When you came, I was scared of you. A little. I thought, this small human girl, she will use us all up, and then she will go. He shook his great head. I was wrong, and I think, even if hard times come, even if it gets bad, I will still be glad I trusted you. I wanted to say it now, in case I forget later when it gets loud. Clarice did not answer him for a moment. She sat on the shoulder of an orc bred so far from violence over so many generations that he could not throw a punch to save his own life, above a river full of lizardmen who 2 weeks ago had marched here to kill her. And she looked out over a whole valley of people that not one kingdom in the world had ever found a use for. She thought about the platform, the 200 faces that had come to watch a worthless girl burn. Worthless. That was the word, the verdict, the thing the testing stone had said about her when she was 8, and her family had agreed with it for 10 years, and her own betrothed had put his name to it at the very end. No talent, no worth, fit for the fire. And here was what the fire had left. Every soul in this valley had been weighed by that same world and stamped with that same word. Exiled, enslaved, sold off, driven out, handed back, thrown away as nothing by someone who had decided they were nothing. The orcs too gentle to be worth keeping. The demons too proud to be allowed to live. A fox whose whole tribe was burned over politics. A child given away twice. Garbage, the world had called all of them, and turned its back on the lot. She had gone and made worth out of every single one. That was the verdict, and she understood, sitting there in the gold light, that she was the one delivering it now, and no longer the one standing underneath it. The world had judged her once, in a square, with a fire, and called the matter closed. It had been wrong about what she was. She had spent a year proving it wrong on a scale the world had not begun to imagine, and she was not the girl in the chains anymore, waiting to be told what she was permitted to be. Somewhere out past the horizon, the world was going to have to learn what it had thrown away. She did not think it would enjoy the learning. "It's a good valley," she told Montego, which was not what she was thinking and was exactly what she meant. He rumbled something pleased deep in that enormous chest and carried her on along the water. Leif mended in about 20 days. When she was fit to travel, Clarice walked her out to the southern road herself. She wished her an easy trip back to the capital and meant it, and then, still pleasant, still smiling, told her plainly not to come back as an enemy. If Leif chose that road, there would be no hesitating in it and no mercy. She should understand that much going in. Leif's ears twitched once. She said she understood and went. A small dark red figure shrinking down the road south until the dust took her. And then, for a little while, it was quiet. Clarice let herself have it. She knew better. She had as good as told Montego that something like this would come around again, and she believed it. But she sat in the quiet anyway, and half pretended she wanted the slow kind of life, the farming and training kind, the kind that lasts. She did not. She had known that about herself for a year. But it was a pleasant thing to pretend on a warm afternoon with the work humming and no one trying to kill anyone in particular. It lasted about 20 days, and then it ended the way these things end, both at once. The first was a demon, one of the smith's helpers, coming up the south road at a flat run with his news half shouted before he reached her. A dungeon, found in the rocky hills above the frontier, a true one, mouth and depth and dark and all. In this world, that word meant danger, and it meant fortune in the very same breath, and either way it meant the quiet was finished. She was still taking that in when she saw the second thing, further down the same road, walking unhurried where the runner had sprinted. Leif had come back, and Leif had not come back alone. The one walking the road at her side was a leopard, a beast woman, tall and rosetted and easy, moving with the loose roll of a thing that had never once in all its life been the prey. Leif called ahead, bright and a touch nervous, that she had brought her boss, that this was Rex Ash, that Rex Ash had wanted very much to come and meet the Lady Clarice in person. So the insider had come out from behind the cat to look at her with her own two eyes. The Lion King's own aide, the one who whispered in the most powerful court the Beastlands had walked 20 days into the wild frontier to stand in an orc village and see for herself the human girl who had taken up every people her king had cast aside and built them into something. The girl who had done, with a burned and talentless nobody's bare hands, the one thing the Lion King on his throne had never once managed. She had united the beasts and the demons under a single name. Clarice looked at her and understood that one part of all this was ending, and a far larger part was only now drawing its first breath. Because Rex Ash was not the only thing moving on that road. Behind her, past her, the whole shape of it was sliding into place. The humans were turning outward. Clarice could feel it in the pieces as they fit together. The merchant network, the Baron with his lands set hard against the border. The talk Leif had carried both ways. Baron Spade's hand had paid for one army of beasts to break here in her square, and that hand had not gone still afterward. The word coming up out of the human kingdoms now was not of armies at all. It was of ledgers, a slow, patient, strangling kind of war, the kind fought with grain prices and closed roads and debt, aimed at the beastmen entire. The world that had thrown her people away was not going to leave a thriving nation of its own cast-offs standing out here in the wilderness. It was coming. It had only changed the weapon in its hand. And far to the east, past all of it, past the frontier and the river and the long roads home, two great houses were rotting quietly from the inside out. The Miller House, the Gloria House, the name that had once been hers. They had burned a worthless daughter to keep their standing. And the standing had not held, because the daughter had walked out of the fire in front of 200 witnesses, and witnesses have mouths. And the rumor of the girl who could not be killed was eating both houses alive from the cellar up. They did not know yet where she was. They did not know the first thing about what she had become out here, but the road that ran between rot and ruin had only one turning left in it. And someday, not soon, but someday, those houses would be desperate enough to come crawling all the way out to the very daughter they had put to the stake. She did not know that part yet, standing there on the road in the late gold light with a leopard watching her, and a dungeon at her back, and a strangling war gathering somewhere past the edge of the world. But she knew the shape of the thing. The quiet was over. It had always been a dream too far, and the plain truth was that she had never really wanted it. Clarice brushed a fleck of nothing from her sleeve, the old gesture, and looked east, past Rex Ash, past Leaf, past the edge of everything she had made, toward the world that had called her worthless, and was about to learn, slowly and at great length, exactly what it had thrown away. Then she smiled and went down the road to meet the leopard.